Clara Whitmore burned the letter standing on the train platform in Pennsylvania, right in front of her Aunt Vera's face. She did not wait until she was alone. She did not wait until the train arrived. She struck the match against the iron post, touched it to the corner of the paper, and held it until the heat reached her fingers. Her aunt said her name once sharp like a warning. Clara dropped the ash. "I heard you the first time," she said. "You cannot keep me. I understand. Now I am leaving. Do not follow me to the platform." She picked up her suitcase and she walked away, and she did not look back once. If this story already has you, please subscribe to our channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single chapter of Clara's journey. Drop your city name in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now come with me to Montana, 1882. Because what was waiting for Clara Whitmore at the end of that long ride west was something she never could have predicted. The train ride took 4 days. Clara sat in the last passenger car with her suitcase wedged between her knees and her handbag in her lap and watched America go by outside the window like something being slowly unrolled. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. The land kept changing, kept widening, kept becoming something larger and less forgiving than what came before it. And by the time she crossed into the territories, she had stopped recognizing anything at all. She had $1.60. She had the clothes on her back, and the clothes in her suitcase, and the small Bible her mother had pressed into her hands 3 years ago on the last morning before the fever took hold for good. She had a letter she had already memorized and burned, and could still read perfectly in the dark behind her eyes. "We cannot keep you any longer. The arrangement has been made. Do not come back." She had nothing else. She told herself on that first day that she would not cry again. She had done her crying on the platform. She had done it privately, facing the iron post, letting the ash fall from her fingers, feeling the particular cold of a door closing behind you that will not open again. That was enough. She was 18 years old, and she was going to Montana Territory to meet a man she had never seen, and crying was not going to make the train go faster or slower, or change what was at the end of the line. She almost held to that promise. Almost. It was somewhere in Nebraska in the middle of the second night when the car was dark and the other passengers were asleep, and the rhythm of the wheels on the track had gotten into her chest and made a sound there that she could not stop. That she pressed her face against the cold glass of the window and let herself break quietly with no audience for exactly as long as she could afford. Then she straightened up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at her own reflection in the dark glass. A thin girl with careful eyes and hair coming loose from its pins. And she said to that reflection without sound, just the shape of the words, "All right then." She did not cry again after that. The train station at Ash Creek, Montana Territory smelled like coal smoke and cattle, and something older beneath both of those, something dry and mineral. Like the earth itself had a different chemistry out here, like the ground was made of different material than the ground she had grown up on. She stepped off the last passenger car with her suitcase in one hand, and her handbag pressed against her ribs, and her boots hit the wooden platform, and she stopped walking and just stood there. The sky was the problem. She had not been prepared for the sky. She had grown up under Pennsylvania sky, which was a reasonable human-scaled thing. You could see it in sections between the buildings and the trees and the hills, and it never made you feel like it was going to swallow you. This sky had no sections. This sky went from one edge of the world to the other, without asking permission, a blue so deep and so absolute, it made everything underneath it feel very small and very exposed. She stood under it and felt herself reduced, not in a cruel way exactly, but in the way of a true thing. "You are small," the sky said matter-of-factly. "You have always been small. Out here we simply do not pretend otherwise." She tightened her grip on her suitcase. "Miss Whitmore." She turned left. The voice had been quiet even without any particular note of welcome, or its absence. Just her name said, with the certainty of someone who already knew which person on the platform they were looking for. He was not what she had been afraid of. She had spent 4 days on that train constructing the man she was going to meet, assembling him from every harsh and careless man she had encountered in her life. Building him feature by feature into something she could prepare herself for. She had prepared for loud, for large, for the particular aggressive hospitality of a man who needed you to know he was doing you a favor. Elias Rowan was none of those things. He was tall, and his tallness was the quiet kind, not the kind that demanded you acknowledge it, just the kind that existed and got on with things. His coat was the color of old pine bark and had been washed many times. His hat had seen considerable weather. His hands, when he reached out and took her suitcase from her without asking, were the hands of a man who had been working outdoors since before he was old enough to decide whether he wanted to. His face was not a young man's face. It was a face that had been weathered by something more than years, something that happened on the inside first and showed on the outside afterward. "Elias Rowan," he said. He set her suitcase beside him. "My wagon's out front. We've got about 2 hours of daylight. Are you ready to go?" No, how do you do? No remark about the journey. No performance of welcome. "Yes," Clara said. "I'm ready." He picked up her suitcase and walked toward the end of the platform, and Clara followed him, and she noticed in the part of her brain that had spent 18 years cataloging these things for survival purposes that he did not look back to check if she was keeping up. He simply walked at a pace she could match and trusted that she would. It was such a small thing. She would think about it for days afterward. He helped her up into the wagon with a hand that was offered once and withdrawn the moment she had her footing, not lingered over, not made into a demonstration. He climbed up on his side. He gathered the reins. They drove. The land spread out around them, and the sun dropped lower, and the silence between them was the kind that could go either way toward comfort or toward tension, depending on which direction you steered it. Clara sat straight and watched the road and waited. "You're younger than I expected," Elias said. Not unkind. The tone of a man noting a fact he was in the process of adjusting to. "I'm 18, Clara said. "I know." He kept his eyes on the horses. "How long since you lost your parents?" She looked at the side of his face. "How did you know about that?" "Pastor Elbridge's letter mentioned it." A pause. "I'm sorry for it." "My father 3 years ago," Clara said. "My mother the winter after." She had said it enough times now that it came out like a recitation smooth practiced with the feeling held at a careful distance. "I was with my aunt and uncle since then. Until they arranged this. Yes." The horses moved steadily through the gold dust of the late afternoon. A hawk turned slow circles above a ridge to the north. Clara watched it and thought about how effortless it looked from down here and how much work it probably was from up there. "I want to be plain with you," Elias said. She looked at him. "I placed that ad because the ranch needs managing, and I'm better at cattle than at household," he said. "That's the honest reason. But I want to say something else that I think needs saying before we get there." He kept his eyes on the road. "You came here because someone gave you no better choice. I know that. And I want you to know that I know it, because there's a difference between a man who pretends the situation is something other than what it is, and a man who looks at it straight." Clara waited. "The room you'll be staying in has a lock on the inside," he said. "That's yours. I won't come to that door without knocking, and I won't come at all unless you open it." He paused. "If you get there and decide in a week or a month that this life isn't what you want, I will put you on the train myself, and I will not hold it against you." Another pause. "And I am not asking you to be anything other than what you are. I don't need a performance. I've had enough of those from people who thought that's what I wanted." Clara sat with that for a moment. The wagon swayed under them. The hawk was gone from the ridge. "Why are you telling me all this?" she said. He thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, which she could see in the slight change in his jaw, the way he turned the question over before answering. "Because someone should have told you something like it a long time ago," he said, "and didn't." Clara turned her face away toward the open country on her right side, and pressed her lips together hard and looked at the horizon until the brightness in her eyes retreated. She would not cry. She had promised herself that. "All right," she said when she was sure of her voice. "I appreciate you saying it." He nodded once and said nothing more, and they drove the rest of the way in silence, and it was the most bearable silence Clara had occupied in years. The ranch appeared at the end of a long flat road, just as the last light was doing its final work on the hills. The house was 2 stories wood-sided with a covered porch running the full length of the front and 2 rocking chairs that had not been rocked in some time. Behind it, the barn and the corral and the low shapes of outbuildings going dim in the early evening. Everything plain, everything orderly, everything built by someone who cared more about function than appearance. But along the fence line, running the whole length of the split-rail fence, from the gate to the corner post, wildflowers were growing. Yellow and purple, unruly, completely wild. No one had planted them. No one had pulled them out either. Clara noticed them and said nothing. Inside the house was dim and neat, and smelled of wood ash and old coffee, and something that might have been loneliness. Except loneliness doesn't usually keep things this clean. Low fire in the grate. Square table with 4 chairs. Shelf of books along one wall. A boy in the kitchen doorway. How was 16 at most slight, with dark hair falling across his forehead, and the particular watchfulness of someone who had learned early that the smart thing was to assess before you committed. He looked at Clara the way you look at a change in weather carefully, without yet deciding how to feel about it. "Samuel Carter," Elias said. "He works the ranch, lives in the bunkhouse." He looked at the boy. "Samuel, this is Miss Clara Whitmore. She'll be staying." "Ma'am," Samuel said, flat, cautious. "Hello, Samuel," Clara said. He looked at her for another 2 seconds, running whatever calculation he needed to run, and then he turned and went back into the kitchen. The sound of something set on the stove. "He's not much for first impressions," Elias said. "Neither am I," Clara said. "We'll manage." Elias carried her suitcase up the stairs. Plain room. Bed with a white coverlet. Dresser. East-facing window. A lamp on the table beside the bed unlit. A small iron stove in the corner. And on the inside of the door, a brass lock. Simple. Solid. Positioned exactly where your hand would find it in the dark without having to look. Clara stood in the middle of that room after Elias had left and looked at that lock for a long moment. Just looked at it. Then she opened her suitcase. She took out her mother's Bible and set it on the dresser. She took out her second dress and hung it on the hook on the wall. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed the 4 days of train travel off her face and hands. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser, just long enough to say, without words, "All right then," and went downstairs. Samuel's stew was dense and dark and savory, with biscuits that were golden outside and soft inside, and Clara ate every bite of it before she understood what she was doing. She set her spoon down and felt the full quiet weight of it, the specific unfamiliar sensation of having had enough, of not having calculated how much she was allowed, of simply eating until she was done, because there was enough and she was permitted to have it. She sat with that feeling for a moment privately while Samuel cleared the pot from the stove. "You cook well," she said. He turned from the stove, that watchful look again parsing the sentence for traps. "Ma'am." "The stew is very good," Clara said. "The biscuits too. You learned from someone." A pause. The careful dignity of someone deciding whether to accept something. "My grandmother," he said, "before she passed." "Mine taught me to bake bread," Clara said. "Before." Samuel looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, not yet, but the specific recognition of a shared language. The before that meant the same thing to both of them. He turned back to the pot and said nothing more, but when he sat back down at his end of the table, he did not pull his chair quite as far away as he had before. Elias watched this exchange from across the table and said nothing. But something in the set of his shoulders changed some long-held thing, releasing quietly like a knot worked loose. After supper, after Samuel had gone to the bunkhouse and the kitchen was clean, Elias poured 2 cups of coffee without asking and set one in front of the empty chair across from him, and Clara understood this as the invitation it was, and sat down. The fire in the grate had gone low and warm. The wind had come up outside and was moving against the house. "Tell me about the ranch," Clara said. "Not the polite version, the real one." He looked at her over his coffee cup. "The real one." "I'll be managing the household. I should know what I'm actually working with." He set the cup down. He thought about it. She could see him deciding how much was honest versus how much was too much for a first night. Then he seemed to make a decision, and he told her. The pasture count and which sections needed fencing. The accounts which were careful but not comfortable. The feed costs and the market prices and the particular problem of the North Creek running lower than usual this time of year. Clara listened and did not interrupt, and at one point got up and found the account book on the shelf behind the stove and opened it on the table between them and asked him to show her where the numbers sat. He stopped talking and looked at the open book and then at her. "You read ledgers," he said. "I kept the books for my uncle's dry goods store for 2 years," she said. "I can read most things." She turned a page. She ran her finger down a column of figures. "Who supplies your lumber?" "Harmon Brothers. Out of—" "You're overpaying," she said, "by a significant amount. The Brennan Mill on the South Road charges 30% less. The woman at the mercantile told me this morning when I asked." He stared at her. "You went to the mercantile this morning?" "I went when you stopped at the post office," she said. "I asked about local suppliers. I thought it was worth knowing." She looked up from the ledger. "Was that wrong?" "No," he said, something in his voice that was not quite surprise and not quite admiration, but was occupying the space between them. "No, that was—" He stopped, shook his head slightly. "I'll look into it." "Your grain storage is also wrong," she said. "The bins are against the north wall. You're losing feed to moisture. I noticed it when I walked through this afternoon. It's a straightforward fix." Howe was quiet for a moment. Then very carefully, as if handling something he did not want to break, "Clara." She looked up. "I placed an ad for someone to manage the household," he said. "I did not expect—" He stopped again, tried once more. "I want you to know that what you're doing right now, the way you think it is, not a small thing." Clara looked at him steadily. "My family told me for years that I thought too much," she said. "That it wasn't becoming. That I should learn to be quieter about it." "Your family was wrong," he said. Flat, no elaboration. Just the fact of it stated plainly and left to stand. Clara looked back down at the account book. She turned another page. Her throat was tight in a way she did not intend to acknowledge. "Show me the north wall bins tomorrow," he said. "First thing." "All right," she said. They stayed at that table with the account book between them for another hour going through figures, and it was the most useful Clara had felt in 3 years, and she did not say that out loud, because she did not yet have the language for it. But she felt it in her hands and in her chest, the particular alive sensation of being taken seriously, of having your mind treated as a tool rather than an inconvenience. When she finally went up to bed, she lay in the dark and listened to the Montana wind, and did not think about the letter or her aunt's face or the 4 days on the train. She thought about the account book. She thought about the grain bins. She thought about what needed doing and how she might do it. She was asleep before she finished the thought. She woke before anyone else. She dressed quietly and went downstairs and made coffee and took a cup out to the porch and stood there in the sharp morning cold and watched the sun come up over the eastern hills, and it came up the way Montana did everything without apology, without gradation, without any of the polite preliminary colors she was used to back east. One moment, the hills were dark shapes against a gray sky. The next, the sun was there completely and entirely there, and the whole world went gold all at once. She stood with her coffee and felt something in her chest that she did not have an immediate name for. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter and more structural than happiness. Something that felt like the first solid ground after a very long time of uncertain footing. She heard the barn door open. Samuel came out into the morning, his collar up against the cold, moving toward the corral, with the purposeful, self-contained efficiency of someone who has a routine they take seriously. He saw her on the porch and stopped. They looked at each other across the yard. "Morning," Clara said. "Ma'am," Samuel said. He started walking again. Then after a few steps without turning around, "Coffee's better with a spoonful of molasses." Clara looked at her cup, looked at the closed kitchen door. "I'll remember that," she said. She watched him cross the yard and disappear into the corral, and then she turned back to the hills and the impossible sky, and thought about molasses and account books and a brass lock on the inside of a door. On the third day, she started reorganizing the root cellar. It needed doing. The shelves were arranged by when things had been put in, rather than by what they were, which meant every time you needed something, you had to move 6 other things to reach it. She was rearranging the preserved goods by category when she heard the careful shuffle of someone deciding whether to come down the steps. "I've got other things to do," Samuel said from the doorway, in the tone of someone establishing this as a fact before any request could be made of them. "I know," Clara said. "I wasn't going to ask you to help. I was going to ask if you wanted to." She set a jar of preserved beets on the new shelf. "There's a difference." Silence from the doorway. Then the sound of steps on the cellar stairs. He handed jars down to her one at a time, with the meticulous care of someone who has decided that if they are going to do something, they are going to do it right. They worked in silence for a while. The cellar was cool and smelled of earth and old preserves, and the particular clean darkness of things stored carefully against hard times. "Where'd you come from?" Samuel asked. Not hostile. The question of someone filling in a map they needed. "Pennsylvania," Clara said. "Back east." "Why'd you come here?" She set a jar of pickled onions in its place. "My family decided they didn't need me anymore," she said. She said it plainly, without the performance of casualness or the performance of tragedy. Just the words, just the fact. "So they made arrangements to send me west." Silence from Samuel. She glanced at him. He was holding a jar of preserved plums and staring at the middle distance with an expression she had worn herself so many times she could have described it from the inside. "My father left when I was 10, he said, quiet, factual. "Mother took sick. I went to the Perryman farm after that." He set the jar on the shelf. 2 years there." "And then Elias hired you," Clara said. "Yeah." "Is it better?" He considered the question with a seriousness that told her no one had asked him that in a while. "Yeah," he said finally. "It's better." They finished the cellar in companionable quiet. When they came back up into the afternoon light, Samuel did not retreat to his careful distance. He stayed. He showed her where the tools were kept without being asked. He told her which horses were temperamental, and which were reliable, and which one had a habit of leaning his full weight against you when he wanted attention, which looked affectionate, but had knocked Samuel flat twice. She laughed at that, genuinely without thinking about it first. Samuel looked at her laugh with the expression of someone who had expected something different and was revising. Not smiling, not yet, but something in the vicinity of it. She did not tell him she saw herself in him. She did not say anything about shared experience or mutual understanding. She just worked alongside him and treated his thoughts as worth hearing, and his knowledge of the horses as the real expertise that it was, and she let that be enough because sometimes enough is the right amount. It was on the 6th day that she heard the name Caleb Whitlock, and everything in Ash Creek rearranged itself into a different shape. She had gone into town with Elias for a feed order and post office, and the small, relentless errands that a working ranch generates. The town was modest: one main street, a hotel, a saloon, 2 churches positioned at opposite ends, as if keeping watch on each other, a school that doubled as a meeting hall. People looked at her. She had expected that. She was new. But some of the looking had a quality to it. A sideways assessment. The particular angle of people who have already formed an opinion and are simply looking for evidence to confirm it. At the feed store, while Elias spoke with the man at the counter, Clara moved along the side wall, checking the delivery weights against her purchase order. A woman came in through the back, perhaps 45, with a tight, composed face and the particular hat of someone who considers themselves better positioned than their circumstances strictly warrant. She stopped when she saw Clara. Her expression did something small and closed. "So you're the Eastern girl," she said. "I suppose I am," Clara said pleasantly, still checking her figures. "Came out here to marry Elias Rowan." "I came out here to see about the possibility," Clara said. "We're taking our time." The woman made a sound. She moved to the counter and spoke in a low voice to the woman there, and Clara heard, designed to be heard. She thought came west looking for money, and poor Elias doesn't know what he's let through his door. The familiar heat rose in Clara's chest. The specific burn of being talked about by people who had made up their minds before you had said 10 words. She finished her check of the purchase order. She walked to the counter and waited for the man there to acknowledge her, and when he did, she asked him clearly, and without hostility, to confirm that the delivery weights matched what was ordered because she had found 2 discrepancies. She read the numbers from her paper. He checked his records. He confirmed the discrepancies. He adjusted the invoice. She thanked him and walked out. The woman with the tight hat was still at the counter, outside. Elias was waiting. He looked at her face, and she had the sense that Elias Rowan was someone who could read weather in the sky and in people with the practiced accuracy of a man whose survival had depended on both. "Mary Grange," he said before she could speak. Clara looked at him. "You knew she'd be in there." "I suspected. She makes a habit of being where things are happening." He untied the wagon reins. "She is married to the ranch manager of a man named Caleb Whitlock." "And who," Clara said, "is Caleb Whitlock?" Elias did not answer immediately. He looked down the main street in the direction of the far end, where a particularly substantial building sat with the settled permanence of something that intended to be there for a very long time. "He owns most of what isn't spoken for in this valley," Elias said. "The biggest spread between here and the river. Interests in the mill, the bank, the hotel." He paused. "He has wanted my land for 8 years. Why specifically yours?" "My land sits between his north range and the creek." His voice was even controlled the voice of someone who had said this to himself many times and had decided not to be frightened by it. "Whoever controls that water access controls this whole stretch of the valley. And he hasn't gotten it." "He has made offers," Elias said. "I have not accepted them." Clara looked at the building at the end of the street. It had a second-floor window that faced east-faced. She realized the length of the entire main street, including the train station at the near end. A window positioned to see everything that arrived. "He watched me come in this morning," she said. It was not a question. Elias was quiet for a moment. "Probably. He'll find out I came from nothing," Clara said. She was thinking through it cleanly, following the logic the way she followed figures in a ledger. "No family, no money, no connections. Someone in a position like his, he'll see that as something to use." "Yes," Elias said. "Against you specifically." "Yes." "Because you didn't sell him your land." "Yes." Clara turned away from the building at the end of the street. She climbed up into the wagon. She arranged her skirts and set her handbag in her lap and looked straight ahead, down the road that led back to the ranch. Then we should make sure," she said, "that there is nothing there for him to use." Elias got up on his side of the wagon. He took the reins. He sat there for a moment without clicking the horses forward. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "You've been here 6 days," he said. "I know." "And you're already—" He stopped. Something moved across his face. "I need you to understand that I did not bring you here to put you in the middle of something dangerous." "I know that too," Clara said. "But I'm in it regardless. That's how these things work." She looked at him steadily. "So we can either pretend I'm not, or we can deal with it." He looked back at her for a long moment. The gray eyes that were the color of sky before a weather change. Reading her the way he read weather. "All right," he said finally. He clicked the horses forward, and they drove back toward the ranch and the building. At the end of the main street fell behind them, and Clara did not look back at it, but she felt the window at the far end of her awareness, like a pressure between her shoulder blades. A watching. She was being watched. She had been watched and assessed and categorized her whole life by people who thought she was less than she was. She knew how it felt. She knew what came after it. What came after it was someone making a move. That evening after supper, after Samuel had gone, and the kitchen was clean, Clara went to the shelf of books along the wall of the main room. She had been wanting to look at them properly since the first night. She ran her finger along the spines. History, agricultural manuals, a Bible. A battered collection of poetry, and at the end of the shelf, wedged between a surveying guide and a cloth-covered journal, a small book that had been read many times. She could tell by the softness of the spine, the way it fell open to its most visited pages, She pulled it out. She knew it. She turned it in her hands. That was Margaret's. She turned. Elias was in the kitchen doorway with 2 coffee cups. He held one out toward her. She took it. She looked at the book. She read it often. Several times. He came in and sat in the chair by the fire. She said it was about a woman who found out she was braver than she thought. Clara sat in the other chair. She held the book in her lap and the coffee cup in her hand and looked at the low fire. "I've read it too," she said quietly. "I know." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I included it in the letter to the pastor. I thought if a woman had read that book and liked it, she might be someone who already understood certain things, without needing everything explained." He paused. "I know that sounds like a strange way to choose." "No," Clara said. "I think it's a very sensible way to choose." The fire settled in the grate. The wind moved against the house. "Tell me about her," Clara said. "Margaret, you don't have to, but I'd like to know if you're willing." Howe was quiet for a moment. She wondered if she had overstepped. Then, "She was stubborn," he said. And something happened to his voice, not breaking, not sentimental, but a softening. The way a hard thing softens when you touch it with something warm. She had opinions about everything, and she was usually right, which made it difficult to argue with her, which she considered one of her finer qualities. A pause. "She got sick in the 3rd winter. I thought she was going to be all right. I was wrong." "I'm sorry," Clara said. 5 years ago." He looked at the fire. The house got very quiet. Clara looked at the book in her lap. She thought about a woman named Margaret who had read it until the spine went soft. She thought about the wildflowers along the fence that no one had planted and no one had pulled out. "She planted those flowers," Clara said, "along the fence." Elias looked at her. Something in his face that was not quite surprise and not quite grief, but was made of both. "No," he said. "They grew there on their own, the summer after she died." A pause. "I left them." Clara looked down at the book. "Of course you did," she said softly. They sat in the firelight for a long time after that, with the book and the coffee and the wind, and at some point the silence between them shifted, settled into something that was not absence, but presence, not emptiness, but the particular fullness of 2 people who have been honest with each other in a room together. Clara went up to bed. She turned the lock. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind and did not think about what she had left behind. She thought about ledger figures and grain bins and a boy who kept his distance and a man who had left wildflowers growing because they had arrived on their own and deserved to stay. She thought about the window at the end of the main street. She thought about a name. Caleb Whitlock. She thought about what it meant that a man like that was already watching. She did not know, not yet, what Caleb Whitlock had already set in motion. She did not know that the woman in the feed store had been placed there deliberately, that the conversation Clara had overheard had been reported back word for word before the wagon reached the edge of town, that the 2 discrepancies in the feed order invoice had been noted, and that the fact of her noticing them had been noted too. She did not know that at that moment in the well-appointed office at the end of Ash Creek's Main Street, Caleb Whitlock was sitting at his desk with a glass of good bourbon and a piece of paper in front of him. The paper listed everything that was known about Clara Whitmore: her age, her origin, her family situation, the circumstances of her arrival, what she had done in 6 days on Elias Rowan's ranch. That last part, what she had done in 6 days, was what Whitlock kept returning to. He read it again. He set the paper flat on the desk with the palm of one hand. "Smart girl," he said to no one. His voice was pleasant, the voice of a man who was not threatened, the voice of a man who had learned over many years and many situations that smart girls were useful when they were pointed in the right direction. And in the right circumstances, they were also useful when they were broken. He picked up his pen. He began to write. Outside his window, Ash Creek went about its evening business, and down at the other end of the main street, the train station stood empty under the stars, waiting for the next thing to arrive from somewhere else. And on the ranch 2 miles out of town, Clara Whitmore slept the deep and dreamless sleep of someone who had, for the first time in years, nothing left to lose. She did not yet know how quickly that could change. She found the discrepancy on a Tuesday morning, and it nearly cost Elias everything before the real fight had even begun. Clara had been at the ranch 9 days when she went back through the account book, not because Elias had asked her to, but because something in the numbers had been sitting wrong at the back of her mind since their first evening at the table together, the way a sound you cannot quite identify keeps pulling your attention back. She sat at the kitchen table before dawn with the book open and a pencil in her hand and went through every page from the beginning, column by column, figure by figure. By the time the sun was fully up, she had found it. She sat back in her chair and looked at what she had found for a long moment. Then she got up and went to the barn. Elias was working on a section of harness that had cracked along the stitching. He heard her come in and looked up, and something in her face made him set the harness down. "What is it?" he said. "Your land tax payment from 3 years ago," Clara said. "Show me the receipt." He looked at her steadily. "Why?" "Because the amount recorded in your ledger and the amount that would have been assessed based on the acreage don't match," she said, "by $43, which is not a rounding error." I was very still for a moment. Then he went to the back of the barn, where he kept a locked box on a high shelf, and he brought it down and opened it and went through the papers inside with the careful speed of a man who had not looked at these documents in some time. He found the receipt. He handed it to her. Clara looked at it. "This receipt is for the correct amount," she said. "The amount that should have been paid. But the amount recorded as paid in your ledger is $43 less." She looked up. "Elias, who kept your books before I came?" I took the receipt back. He looked at it. The expression on his face was the expression of a man watching the floor shift under him, controlled, but only barely. "A man in town," he said slowly. "Gerald Pruitt. He kept accounts for several ranches. He died last spring." "And before he died," Clara said carefully, "who did Gerald Pruitt work for other than ranchers?" The silence in the barn lasted about 4 seconds. "He did some work for Caleb Whitlock's operation," Elias said. His voice had gone flat and careful, the voice of a man putting things together that he did not want to put together. "So your books show a smaller payment than your receipt proves you made," Clara said. "Which means if someone with authority decided to audit your land tax record, they would find what looked like a shortfall, a debt on your land." She paused. "A reason to put your title in question." Elias set the receipt on the workbench beside him. He put both hands flat on the bench and looked at the wall. He stood that way for almost a full minute and did not say anything. "How long has that been in there?" he finally said. "The altered entry was made approximately 3 years ago based on the ink and the handwriting," Clara said. "Right around the time you refused his last offer." The word that came out of Elias Rowan then was not a word Clara would have used, but she understood it completely and did not object to it. He pushed back from the bench. He picked up his hat from the nail on the post and put it on. He started walking toward the barn door. "Where are you going?" Clara said. "To town," he said. "To do what exactly?" He stopped walking. He stood in the barn doorway with the morning light coming in sharp around him, and she could see the tension across his back. The held-down fury of a man who had been patient for a very long time and had just been given a very good reason to stop being patient. "Elias," she kept her voice even, "if you go to town right now, angry, and confront anyone connected to Whitlock, you hand him exactly what he needs. He needs you angry and reactive. He needs you to look like a man who can be provoked." She paused. "Is that what you want to give him?" He stood in the doorway for a long moment. The light came in around him. He did not move. "No," he said finally. Quiet, controlled. The fury still there but pulled back from the edge. "Then come back to the table," Clara said, "and let's figure out what we actually have." He came back. He sat. She put the account book between them and the receipt beside it, and they went through it together, and it was not the relaxed evening of figures they had shared before. It was close and careful and serious. Two people mapping the exact dimensions of a problem that was larger than either of them had understood. By the time Samuel came in for breakfast, they had found 3 other irregularities, small ones. the kind that could each be explained individually as a counting error. But together they formed a pattern, and the pattern had a shape, and the shape pointed in one direction. Samuel stood in the kitchen doorway, and looked at the papers spread across the table, and looked at Clara's face, and looked at Elias's face. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing yet," Clara said. "Make the coffee, Samuel. We're going to need it." He made the coffee. He brought it to the table, and did not go back to the barn, and neither Clara nor Elias told him to. He sat at the corner of the table and listened, and after a while he stopped, just listening, and started asking questions, and the questions were good ones, practical, specific. The questions of someone who had been underestimated so long he had stopped expecting to be taken seriously and had therefore stopped trying. "What about the survey records?" Samuel said. "From when the land was registered? If the original registration shows the correct acreage, and the tax record was altered after, that's two documents contradicting each other. That's harder to explain away." Clara looked at him. Elias looked at him. "Where would the original survey records be?" Clara asked. "County seat," Samuel said. He looked slightly uncomfortable being looked at with that much attention. "My father did survey work before he left. I know how the recording works." "How far is the county seat?" Clara said. "Day's ride," Elias said. He was looking at Samuel with an expression that Clara recognized, the same recalibration she had seen on his face when she had caught the lumber pricing. The expression of a man quietly revising his understanding of something he thought he had already understood. "I can ride there," Samuel said. "I know the clerk there, Mr. Hendricks. He taught at the school before he took the county position. He's a fair man." "I'll go with you," Elias said. "You shouldn't," Clara said. Both men looked at her. "If Whitlock is watching, and he is you leaving for the county seat, sends a signal. He'll know what you're doing, and he'll have time to prepare for it." She looked at Samuel. "But Samuel going alone looks like a boy running an errand. Nobody watches a boy on an errand." Samuel sat up slightly straighter. Clara noticed and did not comment on it. "She's right," Elias said. He said it the way he said most things, simply without making a performance of it. But she caught the look he gave Samuel, the weight in it. "You'd be willing?" "Yes," Samuel said, without hesitation. The word of someone who had been waiting a long time to be asked. That evening, after Samuel had gone to prepare for the early start, and Elias had gone to check on the stock, Clara sat alone at the kitchen table with the account book and the receipts laid out in front of her, and thought about Gerald Pruitt and 3-year-old Ink and a man who sat in a window at the end of a main street watching what arrived on trains. She had grown up being told she thought too much. She had grown up being told that her mind was an inconvenience, that a woman who calculated things was somehow taking something away from the people around her, that the right posture was to know less and take up less and require less from any given room. She thought about what Caleb Whitlock expected of her. He expected nothing. She was 18 years old. She had come from nothing. She had no family and no connections, and he had had 6 days to decide that she was a variable he could account for without much effort. A frightened girl who had come west on a marriage arrangement. A person of no particular consequence. She closed the account book. She set her hand flat on top of it. She thought about what it meant to be underestimated by a man like that, and she thought about it for a long time, and she came to a conclusion that surprised her with its clarity. It was an advantage, only if she used it right. But it was an advantage. She was still sitting there when Elias came back in from the stock check. He looked at her at the table with her hand on the account book and her face doing whatever it was doing. "You figured something out," he said. "Maybe," she said. "Sit down." He sat. "He thinks I'm nothing," she said. "He's had people watching since I arrived, and what they've seen is a girl who came from nowhere, who checks invoice figures and reorganizes sellers and has long conversations with your hired boy. He does not see me as a threat. He sees me as a detail." She paused. "That means I can move without him knowing I'm moving." Elias looked at her steadily. "Move how? I'm going to go through every record in this house," she said. "Everything Margaret kept, everything you've kept, anything connected to the land or the water rights, or any dealings with anyone in this valley going back as far as I can find. And I'm going to do it quietly. And I'm going to do it while he is watching you and waiting for you to make a move that he can use." She watched Elias's face as she said it. She watched the thing that moved across it, not quite fear and not quite relief, but something made of both the expression of a man who has been fighting alone for a long time and has just heard footsteps coming from a direction he did not expect. "Clara," he said. "I'm not asking permission," she said quietly. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do, because I think it needs doing, and I think I can do it. But I want you to know." A long quiet. "Why?" he said. "Why do you want to do this? You've been here 9 days. This is not your fight." She looked at him. "Someone did an unfair thing to you," she said. "They did it quietly and carefully, and they counted on nobody ever looking close enough to see it. I am very good at looking close." She paused. "And I think it is possible that I have been waiting my whole life for someone to give me a problem worth solving." Elias looked at her for a long moment. The gray eyes, the stillness. "All right," he said. The same 2 words he had said to her on the road back from Ash Creek. She was starting to understand them as his particular form of trust, not effusive, not performed, but solid. Weight-bearing. "One more thing," she said. "What? Show me where Margaret kept her personal papers." Something crossed his face. "Why?" "Because she was on this land before you," Clara said gently. "And she was clearly a woman who paid attention. And I have a feeling she noticed things." Howe was quiet for a moment. Then he got up and went upstairs, and she heard him moving around above her, and when he came back down, he had a wooden box smaller than the one in the barn, with a simple latch, and he set it on the table in front of her. "I haven't opened that since she passed," he said. His voice was even, only barely. "Do you want to be here when I look through it?" Clara asked. He thought about it. "No," he said. "I trust you." He picked up his hat from the hook by the door. "I'll be in the barn if you need me." He went out. Clara sat alone at the table with Margaret Rowan's box in front of her, and the lamp burning low, and the house quiet around her. She set her hand on the latch. She held it there for a moment, aware of what she was about to do, aware of the intimacy of it, the particular intrusion of looking into the private thoughts of a woman who was gone. "I'm sorry," she said quietly to no one, to Margaret, to the empty room. "I think you would understand." She opened the box. Margaret Rowan had been a meticulous woman. The papers inside were organized the way Clara organized things, by category, by date, with a clear sense of what connected to what. Letters sorted and tied. Household accounts which mirrored the ledger in the kitchen, but with additional margin notes in a small, precise handwriting. 3 journals, cloth-covered, filled front to back. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth and tied with a length of twine, a separate bundle of papers that had been deliberately set apart from the rest. Clara untied the twine. She unfolded the oilcloth. Inside were 6 letters addressed to Margaret from a woman named Alice Garner in the years 1877 through 1879. And underneath the letters, in Margaret's own hand, 7 pages of notes. Careful, organized, dated. The notes of a woman who had suspected something and had begun quietly to document it. The name that appeared in those notes again and again and again was Caleb Whitlock. Clara read through the first page, then the second. Her breath was very even and very controlled, and she was aware of her hands wanting to shake, and she did not let them. By the 4th page, she understood what Margaret Rowan had been doing in the years before she died. She had been doing exactly what Clara had proposed to do tonight. She was still reading when the door opened and Elias came back in. He stopped when he saw her face. "What is it?" he said. Clara looked up. She set the papers carefully flat on the table, one beside the other, in the order she had been reading them. She looked at Elias, standing in the doorway, with the night behind him. She knew, Clara said. Margaret knew about the land agreements. She was documenting it. She was collecting evidence. Clara paused. She had been doing it for 2 years before she got sick. The silence in the kitchen was very complete. Elias crossed the room slowly. He stood on the other side of the table and looked down at the papers laid out under the lamplight. He looked at them for a long time without touching them. Clara watched his face and did not say anything. "She never told me," he said. "She may have been protecting you," Clara said gently, "if she thought it was dangerous." He reached out and picked up the top page. He looked at Margaret's handwriting, the small, precise, familiar letters, and Clara saw his jaw tighten, saw the breath he took that was slightly deeper than the ones before it. He set the page back down. "What does it say?" His voice was steady. "It cost him." "That Caleb Whitlock has been doing this for years," Clara said. "Not just to you, to other families in the valley. The Garner family. Alice Garner, who wrote those letters, lost their land in 1879. They were told they had a tax debt they couldn't prove they'd paid." She looked at the papers. "Their receipt showed they'd paid. Their ledger record showed they hadn't. Same pattern as yours. But they didn't have a second copy of the survey record, and they couldn't afford a legal challenge, so they sold." She paused. "Whitlock bought their land for a quarter of its value." Elias stared at the papers. "There are two others mentioned in these notes," Clara said. "Families who were pushed out the same way. Same method. The Pruitt connection. Gerald Pruitt keeping books for multiple ranches and altering the records is in Margaret's notes by name." "She had proof," Elias said slowly. "She had proof and she—" He stopped. "She had the beginning of proof," Clara said. "She had documentation of the pattern. She had Alice Garner's letters. She had the discrepancy she found in your ledger, which is the same one I found this morning. But she hadn't yet gotten the survey records from the county seat. She hadn't completed it." She watched him understand what she was saying. "Samuel is riding to the county seat tomorrow," she said quietly. Elias put his hands on the table and looked down at Margaret's notes for a long moment and did not speak. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright in the lamplight, with something that was not grief and was not anger, but was made of both the specific brightness of a man who has just understood something that changes the shape of everything. "She was trying to protect this land," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "After 5 years I thought it was just me and Whitlock," he said. "I thought it was just about my land." "It was never just about your land," Clara said. "It was about the water, about every piece of land that touches that creek. He has been moving across this valley for years. Elias, systematically, and the method is always the same because the method works. Because people are afraid to look too closely at things in writing, and because a man with money can make a discrepancy in a ledger look like a debt, and because most people cannot afford to fight a man with that much reach." She paused. "But Margaret knew. And now we know. And Samuel is going to the county seat tomorrow." Elias straightened up. He picked up his hat from the table where he had set it and turned it in his hands, the slow, deliberate motion of a man making a decision. "This is more than I brought you into," he said. "I need you to know that." "I know it," Clara said. "You don't have to." "Elias." She said his name quietly, but it stopped him. "I have been sent away and over and managed and positioned my whole life. I have never once in 18 years been given a problem that was worth the full capacity of my mind." She looked at him steadily across the table. "Don't take this one away from me." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said, the third time. Each time it meant something slightly different. This time it meant something that felt close to partnership, and Clara recognized it, and she did not look away from it. Samuel left before dawn the next morning on the fastest horse in the corral with a list of what to look for, written in Clara's handwriting on a folded piece of paper in his breast pocket. He had not said much the night before when they explained it to him. He had listened carefully, asked 2 precise questions, and then gone to the bunkhouse and prepared his gear. At the door before he left, he had stopped and looked at Clara. "She kept those papers for 2 years, he said. "Mrs. Rowan." "Yes," Clara said. "She didn't tell anyone." "No." He thought about that. "That must have been hard," he said, "carrying that alone." "I think it was," Clara said. Samuel looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded the nod of someone absorbing something that had rearranged the shape of things for them, and he went out. Clara stood at the kitchen window and watched him ride out into the pre-dawn darkness, and felt something in her chest that was partly fear and partly pride, and partly something she did not yet have a word for. She stood there until he was gone, and the yard was empty. "He'll be all right," Elias said behind her. "I know," she said. "He's more capable than anyone gives him credit for." "I know he is," Elias said quietly. "I have known it for a while." She turned from the window. "Then tell him," she said. "Don't make him wait until he proves it to you. Tell him now while it matters." Elias looked at her. "You don't soften things, do you? Is that a problem?" "No," he said, something in his voice. "No, it is not." The next 2 days were the hardest of the waiting kind. Clara cleaned and organized and checked and catalogued and kept herself busy with the 1,000 tasks a working ranch generates in a relentless ongoing flow. She went through Margaret's notes, again more carefully, and built her own index, a clean summary of every family mentioned, every date, every discrepancy Margaret had documented, and how it connected to the broader pattern. She kept the index hidden. Not from Elias, she showed it to him each evening, but from the general visibility of a house where anyone coming to the door might happen to see what was on the table. Because on the second day, someone came to the door. She was alone in the house when it happened. Elias was in the far pasture checking fence. Samuel was still at the county seat. The knock was firm, unhurried, the knock of someone who expected to be answered. She opened the door. The man standing on the porch was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, in the particular careful way of a man who wants you to notice that he can afford to dress carefully. His hat was black and clean. His eyes were light and unusual light brown, that was almost gold, and they moved over her face and the doorway behind her with the quick, comprehensive assessment of someone who was used to walking into situations and reading them faster than other people could arrange themselves. She knew without being told. "Miss Whitmore," Caleb Whitlock said. His voice was pleasant, a social voice warm on the surface, calibrated for rooms. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Clara had approximately 3 seconds to decide what kind of woman Caleb Whitlock was going to meet on this porch. She used them. "Mr. Whitlock," she said. Not a question. She watched his eyes adjust to the fact that she already knew his name. "Good. Come in." She stepped back from the door. She let him walk into the kitchen. She watched him look around the room, quick, thorough cataloging, and she watched his eyes stop on the table, which was clean and bare. The index and the account book both put away before she had gone to bed the night before. "Coffee," she said. "Thank you, no." He turned back to her with the pleasant smile of a man exercising patience. I heard that Elias had someone come to help with the household. I wanted to call and welcome you properly. We try to be good neighbors out here." "That's very kind," Clara said. She sat down at the table. She folded her hands on top of it the way she had seen her aunt receive visitors she did not fully trust. Composed, attentive, giving nothing away. He remained standing. A choice. She noted it. "You're from Pennsylvania," he said. "That's a long way to come." "It is," she said. "Family back there." "No," she said. "Not anymore." Something moved across his face. Not sympathy. An adjustment. She had confirmed something he already knew, and he was recalibrating, deciding how much room she had left for sentimentality that he could work with. "Well," he said, "that makes Ash Creek your home now, I suppose, and I hope you find it welcoming." He looked around the kitchen again, slower this time, less cataloging, and more performing the action of looking around in the comfortable way of a man who considers himself welcome anywhere. "Elias is a good man, stubborn but good. I've known him a long time." "He speaks highly of the valley," Clara said. "Does he speak of me?" She looked at him pleasantly. "He mentioned you'd been a neighbor for some years," she said. "That you have extensive interests in the area. That's one way to put it." He smiled. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Whitmore. I have a fondness for this particular piece of land. I've made Elias fair offers over the years. He's a man who knows his own mind, which I respect, but I do hope now that there's someone here who might have a fresh perspective on things, that he'll consider his options a bit more openly." He paused. "A young woman with no connections in this territory ought to think carefully about security, about long-term stability. Elias is a hard-working man, But this ranch is small, and the valley is changing. There are people here with the capacity to ensure that a household does well, and people without that capacity." Another pause. "You understand what I'm saying?" Clara looked at him for a moment. She understood exactly what he was saying. He was telling her to influence Elias. He was telling her that cooperation had rewards, and that the alternative was a slowly applied pressure that a small ranch with altered tax records could not ultimately withstand. He was doing it politely with a social voice and a pleasant face, and he was doing it to a girl he was certain had no idea what she was walking into. "I appreciate your candor," Clara said. Her voice was even and warm and gave away nothing. "It's always good to understand a community's landscape. I'm still learning mine." She stood. "I'll let Elias know you called." He looked at her, the gold eyes assessing. He had expected she could see it in the brief adjustment of his expression, either fear or flattery, or both. He had not expected this particular quality of composed nothing. "Of course," he said. He picked up his hat. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Miss Whitmore." "And you?" she said. She walked him to the door. She watched him cross the yard to his horse. She watched him mount and turn the horse toward the road and pause for just a moment, just long enough to look back at the house. She was standing in the doorway, visible, composed, watching him go. He turned the horse and rode. Clara stood in the doorway until the sound of hoofbeats was gone entirely. Then she walked back into the kitchen. She sat down at the table. She pressed her hands flat on the table surface, and she let the controlled steadiness drop for exactly 30 seconds. Felt the fear that had been running underneath the entire conversation, the awareness of what she had just walked up to the edge of, and then she picked it back up and put it away. She got up. She retrieved the index from where she had hidden it behind the stacked preserves on the highest shelf. She sat back down. She picked up her pencil. She wrote at the top of a new page. He came in person. He did not send someone. That means he is not yet concerned enough to be indirect. He thinks this can be resolved quietly. That is his mistake. She underlined his mistake. She was still writing when she heard hoofbeats in the yard an hour later, and looked up to see Samuel riding in through the gate, dusty and tired, and sitting straight in the saddle. She was on the porch before he had fully dismounted. "Did you find them?" she said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document and held it out to her. His hand was steady, and his face was trying to be neutral and not entirely succeeding. "The original survey record," he said. "Mr. Hendricks gave me a certified copy. He said—" Samuel paused. Something moved through his expression. "He said he'd been wondering when someone was going to come asking about this particular parcel. He said a man came 6 months ago trying to access the original, and he'd turned him away because the request wasn't properly filed." He looked at her. He knew something was wrong. He's been waiting. Clara took the document. She unfolded it. She read it. She looked at the acreage figure at the top of the page, matched it in her mind, against the account ledger and the tax record, and the altered entry, and the connection closed like a lock clicking home. "Go get Elias," she said. Samuel was already moving. That evening, the three of them sat at the kitchen table with the certified survey record, and Margaret's notes, and the account ledger, and the receipts, and Clara's index spread between them, and Clara walked them through it, piece by piece, connection by connection, the way it all fit together into a pattern that was clear and documented and provable. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Elias sat looking at the papers. He had not spoken for several minutes. Samuel was watching him with the particular attention of someone waiting to take their direction from the steadiness or unsteadiness of a man they trusted. "He came here today," Elias said finally. Not a question. Clara had already told him. "Yes," she said. "What did he say exactly?" She told him. All of it precisely, including the pauses and the adjustments in Whitlock's expression, and what she had read in them. Elias listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet again for a moment. "He thinks he can pressure you," he said. "He thinks I'm someone who can be pressured," Clara said. "That's different." Elias looked at her across the table. "And can you—" She met his eyes. "I grew up being managed by people who thought they knew better than me," she said. I learned a long time ago how to let someone think they're succeeding at that while I do something else entirely. Something moved across his face. That is a harder thing to learn than most people realize, he said quietly. Yes, she said. It is. Samuel had been sitting very still through all of this, looking at the papers on the table. He looked up now. What do we do next? He asked. Clara looked at the papers. She thought about the other families in Margaret's notes. The Garners. The others who had been pushed out. She thought about Alice Garner writing letters to a woman she trusted. Letters that had ended up in a wooden box at the bottom of a set of stairs, because the woman who received them had gotten sick before she could finish what she had started. We finish what Margaret started, she said. Neither Elias nor Samuel said anything for a moment. Then Elias reached across the table and set his hand flat beside the survey record, not touching it, not touching her, just setting his hand down in the space between them as a kind of declaration. This, here, we proceed. All right, he said. Outside, the Montana wind was moving through the valley, pushing cold air off the hills and down across the flatland. And somewhere at the other end of the main street of Ash Creek, in a well-appointed office that smelled of good tobacco, a man who had never once in his adult life been seriously opposed was sitting at his desk, doing his careful work, certain that the frightened girl from Pennsylvania was exactly what she appeared to be. He had no idea, and that Clara Whitmore had decided was the most important thing she had. Samuel found the second set of books on a Wednesday, and everything they thought they understood about Caleb Whitlock became suddenly terrifyingly small. He had ridden back to the county seat 3 days after the first trip, this time with a more specific list and a letter from Elias authorizing him to request additional land registration records for properties adjacent to the Rowan parcel. Mr. Hendricks, the county clerk, who had been waiting for someone to come asking, had gone further than Samuel expected. He had pulled records not just for the Rowan land, but for every parcel transfer in the valley over the previous decade. And he had stacked them on the counter and looked at Samuel over his spectacles and said quietly, "You take careful notes, young man. And you tell whoever sent you that there are more people in this county who have been waiting for someone to look at this than they might imagine." Samuel came back with 6 pages of notes in his own hand, and a face that was very controlled in the way faces get when they are controlling something large. He spread the notes on the kitchen table without saying anything. He waited for Clara to read them. She read them. She read them twice. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, which was something Elias had never seen her do before, and he understood from that single uncharacteristic gesture that what was on those pages was worse than what they had already known. "Tell me," he said. Clara looked back down at the notes. "It's not 8 years," she said. "It's 15. And it's not just the water access ranches. It's the mill, the hotel, the bank, every significant piece of Ash Creek's commercial center." She paused. Whitlock didn't build an empire by being successful at ranching Elias. He built it by taking things that already existed and belonged to other people and finding legal mechanisms to transfer ownership. "The land tax scheme," Elias said. "That's one mechanism, but there are others." She pointed to a section of Samuel's notes. 3 properties transferred through debt instruments that were called in simultaneously, 3 families who had borrowed from the same private lending source, all called within the same 60-day window, which made it impossible for any of them to refinance or negotiate separately. They had to sell fast. "Who bought P. Whitlock?" Samuel said. 2 others transferred through disputed boundary surveys. The original survey records altered new surveys, commissioned by a surveyor who worked exclusively for Whitlock's interests. Boundary lines redrawn to show the neighboring property, encroaching on land Whitlock had already purchased. She looked up. "And 1 property, the Garner property that Margaret documented, transferred through exactly the mechanism they used on you. Altered tax record, manufactured debt sale under duress." Elias was very still. 15 years, he said. "At least," Clara said. "These are only the records Mr. Hendricks could pull. There may be more." "How many families?" Elias asked. Clara looked at the notes. 11, she said. "That we can document." The word sat in the kitchen like something physical. 11 families. 11 sets of people who had worked land and lost it, who had built something and had it taken through a mechanism so quiet and so bureaucratic that most of them probably had not fully understood what had happened until it was already done. Elias pushed back from the table. He stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to them, and Clara let him stand there and did not say anything, because some things needed a moment before they could be handled. Samuel looked at Clara. She shook her head slightly. Wait. After a moment, Elias turned back around. His face was the face of a man who had made a decision and was now on the other side of making it. What do we need? He said. We need the families, Clara said. Not just the documentation. We need the people. The ones who were pushed out wherever they are now, whatever became of them. Because a pattern of fraud documented in county records is a legal argument. But 11 families standing up in the same room and saying what happened to them is something different. That's something a judge has to look at. Some of them left the territory entirely, Elias said. Some, Clara said. But not all. Alice Garner, the woman who wrote to Margaret, where is she now? Elias thought about it. Last I heard, she and her husband were sharecropping land south of town. The Pemberton operation. Will she talk to us? She will talk to me, Elias said. We have known each other for many years. Then that's where we start. Clara began organizing the notes into a stack, aligning the edges the way she always did when she was moving from analysis to action. We start with Alice Garner. We find out which of the other families are still in the territory. And we move carefully, because the moment Whitlock understands what we are building, he will move to stop it. He already suspects something, Samuel said. Both of them looked at him. The man he sent to check the fence line on the north pasture 2 days ago, I don't think he was checking the fence. Clara went very still. What man? Right, Samuel said. Came along the north fence line slow like he was looking for brakes. But he wasn't looking at the fence. He was looking at the house. He paused. I recognize the horse. It belongs to Wade Colton. Colton works for Whitlock. The three of them looked at each other across the table. How long ago? Clara said. 2 days, Samuel said. I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure. But after what you just read out, I'm sure now. Clara looked at Elias. We have less time than I thought. How much less? He said. I don't know. But we can't wait to find out. She stood. Can you get to Alice Garner today? I can leave within the hour, Elias said. Take the south road, not the main road. He nodded. He was already moving toward the door. Elias. He stopped. She picked up the survey record and Margaret's notes and held them out. Take copies of these. Leave the originals here hidden. If something goes wrong and you can't get back, Alice Garner needs to understand what she's looking at. He took the papers. He looked at her for a moment, the steady gray eyes doing their reading weather work. Nothing is going to go wrong, he said. I know, she said. Take the copies anyway. I took them. He went. Clara turned to Samuel. I need you to do something that might feel strange, she said. All right, Samuel said. I need you to go into town. I need you to be visible, the feed store, the mercantile, wherever people see you. I need anyone watching this ranch to see that things are normal here, that nothing is happening, that Samuel Carter is just running ordinary errands. Samuel looked at her. You want me to be a distraction. I want you to be ordinary, she said, which is almost the same thing. He thought about it, and, with the careful dignity she had come to recognize in him, the dignity of someone who had been overlooked long enough to understand its strategic uses. I can do ordinary. I know you can, she said. Be back before dark. He went. Clara was alone in the house. She stood in the quiet kitchen and listened to the absence of other people for a moment, and then she went to the hiding place behind the stacked preserves and got out her index and sat down at the table and began writing. She wrote for 3 hours. She wrote everything. Every connection, every date, every document reference, every name. The whole shape of what they had found, laid out in the clearest language she could manage. She wrote it as if she were writing it for a judge who knew nothing about Ash Creek or Caleb Whitlock or a girl from Pennsylvania who had come west on a marriage arrangement and found something entirely different from what she expected. She wrote it to be understood by someone who had no reason to believe her and would need the logic to be airtight. She was on the 4th page when she heard the horse in the yard. She did not panic. She moved. She put the pages in the hiding place. She set a pot of water on the stove. She was standing at the stove, stirring nothing in particular, when the knock came at the door. It was not Whitlock this time. The man on the porch was younger, perhaps 30, with a deputy's badge on his coat and an expression that was trying to be neutral and not entirely succeeding. She recognized the attempt. It was the expression of someone doing something they had been told to do and were not entirely comfortable doing. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Yes," she said. "Deputy Aldous Cole. I need to speak with Mr. Rowan." "He's not here at the moment," Clara said. "Can I help you?" Cole shifted his weight. "I have a notice," he said. "A formal notice." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document and held it out. "I'm required to deliver it to the property owner or their designated representative." Clara took it. She unfolded it. She read it. It was a notice of tax assessment review. Formal language, official seal. It stated that the county tax records for the Rowan parcel had been flagged for discrepancy review and that a formal audit would be conducted within 30 days, during which time any contested claim on the property would be held in abeyance pending resolution. Pending resolution. She knew what that meant. 30 days of legal uncertainty during which Elias could not sell, could not borrow against the land, could not do anything with the property that required a clear title. And if the audit found, as it would find, because the ledger had been altered to show it a shortfall in tax payment, the resolution of that claim would be whatever Whitlock's connections in the county bureaucracy made it. She refolded the document. She looked at Deputy Cole. "Who filed the request for this review?" she asked. Cole looked at her. Something moved through his expression. "The request came from the county assessor's office," he said carefully. "I understand where it came from," Clara said. "I'm asking who filed it. Who brought the discrepancy to the assessor's attention?" A pause. "I'm not at liberty to—" "Deputy Cole," Clara said. Her voice was still pleasant, still, even still the voice of a polite young woman receiving a document at a door. "You came out here on a Wednesday afternoon to deliver a legal notice to a ranch where you had every reason to expect the owner would not be present. You look like a man who is doing something he was told to do and is not entirely easy about it." She paused. "I'm not asking you to do anything except confirm something I already know. Was this filed by Caleb Whitlock or someone representing his interests?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. He looked at her. He looked past her at the ordinary kitchen. He looked back at her. "The request came through the assessor's office," he said again. But something in his voice had changed, a slight flatness that was not quite confirmation and was not quite denial, but was the sound of a man choosing his words with extra precision, because the truthful answer was the one he was not supposed to give. "Thank you," Clara said. "I'll make sure Mr. Rowan receives this." Cole nodded. He turned to go. Then he stopped his back to her and stood still for a moment. "Miss Whitmore," he said without turning around. His voice was low. "There's a man named Hendricks at the county seat." Clara waited. "He keeps good records," Cole said. "He's been keeping them for a long time." Another pause. 30 days is enough time if a person knows what they're doing. He walked to his horse. He mounted. He rode out of the yard at a steady pace, not hurrying, looking straight ahead. Clara stood on the porch and watched him go, and understood that she had just received something more valuable than a warning. She had received confirmation that not everyone in Ash Creek was Caleb Whitlock's. She went back inside. She took out the index. She wrote down Cole's exact words and the tone in which he had said them and what she believed they meant. Then she went to the hiding place and retrieved the pages she had been writing and sat back down and continued exactly where she had left off. Because 30 days meant she had time, but not much of it, and every hour of the next 30 days was going to matter. Elias came back at dusk with Alice Garner. Clara had not expected that. She had expected him to come back with news, with a report of the conversation, with information about what Alice Garner knew and was willing to say. She had not expected him to bring the woman herself, and from the look on Elias's face when he came through the door, the decision had been Alice Garner's, not his. Alice Garner was perhaps 50, with work-worn hands, and a face that had the particular quality of someone who has survived something by deciding to survive it, and has not yet decided what to do with the survival. She was not a frightened woman. She had been frightened, and had come out the other side of it, into something harder and quieter. She looked at Clara across the kitchen, and said nothing for a moment, taking her measure. "You found Margaret's notes," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Clara said. "She mentioned you by name. You wrote to her. For 2 years." Alice sat down at the table without being invited, which Clara respected immediately. "I wrote to her because I didn't know what else to do, and she was the only person I trusted to understand it. After we lost the land, after we had to go, I kept writing because—" She stopped, compressed something in her expression. "Because what happened to us was wrong, and someone needed to know it was wrong, even if nothing could be done about it." "Something can be done about it now," Clara said. Alice looked at her steadily. "You're 18 years old," she said. "Not unkind, just the factual assessment of someone calculating the odds." "Yes," Clara said. "I am." She put the tax assessment notice on the table between them. "And he filed this today, which means he knows we're getting close, which means we have 30 days to finish what you and Margaret started." Alice picked up the notice. She read it. She set it down. Her jaw was tight. "He filed the same kind of notice against us," she said. 6 years ago. We had 30 days too. We couldn't find anything in time." "You didn't have this," Clara said. She put Margaret's notes on the table. Then the certified survey record. Then her index. One by one laid flat, the whole shape of it visible. Alice looked at the pages. She picked up Margaret's notes first. She read the first page, and her eyes went bright, and she set the page down and pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, a single private moment that she allowed herself, and then put away. "She finished it," Alice said. Her voice was controlled, barely. I thought she died before she could—" "She didn't finish it," Clara said gently. "She got very far. We finished it." Alice looked at her across the table. Then she looked at Elias, who was standing by the kitchen door with his hat in his hands, watching the two women with the expression of a man who understands that something important is happening and has the wisdom to let it happen without inserting himself into it. "What do you need from me?" Alice said. "Your testimony," Clara said. "In writing, signed, witnessed. Every detail you remember, the notice you received, the audit, the sale, every conversation you had with anyone connected to Whitlock's operation. And if you know where any of the other families are the ones in Margaret's notes—" "I know where 4 of them are," Alice said. "Tom Briggs is still in the territory. So are the Hendersons, what's left of them. Ruth Caldwell is in Billings, but she'd come back for this." She paused. "Franklin Marsh died 3 years ago, but his wife Clara—" She stopped, looked at Clara Whitmore. "His wife's name is Clara too. She's living with her daughter on the east side of the valley." "Can you reach them?" Clara said. Quietly, without drawing attention. "I have been quiet for 6 years," Alice Garner said, and there was a specific compressed anger in her voice that Clara recognized because she had been carrying something like it herself for most of her life. "I know how to be quiet. What I want to know is whether this is actually going to amount to something, or whether I'm going to put these people through dredging up the worst thing that happened to them, and it's going to come to nothing." Clara looked at her steadily. "I can't promise what a judge will do," she said, "but I can promise that what we bring to a judge will be the clearest, most complete, most thoroughly documented case that anyone has brought against Caleb Whitlock. I can promise that it will be hard to look away from." She paused. "And I can promise that Margaret Rowan spent 2 years building this for a reason, and I intend to make sure that reason is honored." Alice looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through her face, assessment calculation, the specific evaluation of someone who has been disappointed before and is deciding whether the risk is worth taking again. "All right," she said. And there it was, the word, the same word, 3 people in this kitchen at different moments choosing it, and each time it cost something, and each time it meant the same thing. We go forward. That night, after Alice Garner had gone back to the Pemberton farm, with a copy of Margaret's notes tucked inside her coat. Elias and Clara sat at the kitchen table and looked at what they had and what they still needed. 30 days, Elias said. Less realistically, Clara said, because he will move before 30 days if he thinks we're close. He filed this to slow us down and to signal that he knows we're doing something. The moment he finds out we have the families, he'll escalate. What does escalation look like? Elias said. Clara thought about that honestly. I don't know exactly, she said. But men like Whitlock, men who have operated the way he has for 15 years without serious opposition, when they feel genuinely threatened, they tend to do something public. Something designed to establish the narrative before the other side can. She paused. He'll try to define who I am before I can define myself. Meaning he'll go after you specifically. He already is, she said. The woman in the feed store was the beginning. The visit here was the middle. Whatever comes next is the part designed to make people stop listening to me before they hear what I have to say. Elias was quiet for a moment. I won't let him do that, he said. Flat. Final. You can't stop him from saying things, Clara said. What you can do is make sure that when he does, the truth is already documented and already in front of people who matter. She looked at him. We need a lawyer, Elias. A real one. Not someone from Ash Creek who has to live with Whitlock afterward. Miles City, Elias said. There's a man there, Harlan Voss. He does land law. He's got a reputation for taking cases the local attorneys won't touch. Can you write to him tonight? I can ride to him, Elias said. Miles City is 2 days. I can leave tomorrow, meet with Voss, and be back within 5 days. Clara looked at him. You'd leave the ranch. You'd be here, he said. She held his gaze. And if Whitlock comes while you're gone? Then you do what you've been doing, Elias said. You be smarter than him, which has not yet been a problem. Something in Clara's chest moved, not quite the thing she would have called warmth, and not quite the thing she would have called courage, but something that existed between them. Something that had been growing in the particular way things grow when you are not watching for them quietly in the direction of available light. All right, she said. Go. He left at dawn with the copies of everything Clara had organized, the notes, the index, the survey record, the documented discrepancies packed into his saddlebag in a waterproof wrap. Clara stood on the porch and watched him ride out, and then went back inside and put water on for coffee, and sat down and started writing again. The knock came at noon, and it was not Whitlock, and it was not Deputy Cole. It was Wade Colton, the man Samuel had seen on the fence line. He was perhaps 40, with a broad, flat face, and the specific physical stillness of a man who was comfortable with the idea of making other people uncomfortable. He did not wait to be invited in. He stepped up onto the porch and stood in the doorway, not quite inside, not quite outside the position of a man who wanted to make a room feel smaller without technically entering it. Mr. Rowan home, he said. He's away, Clara said. She was standing at the table, and she stayed there, which kept the table between them, which was a thing she did deliberately. Away, Colton said, like he was tasting the word. Convenient. Is there something I can help you with? Clara said. Mr. Whitlock wanted me to check in, Colton said. Make sure everything was all right out here, especially with the ranch owner being away and all. His eyes moved around the kitchen the way Whitlock's had, but without Whitlock's social performance. Colton looked at things the way a man looks at things he is considering the value of. Young woman alone on a ranch, lots of things can go wrong. Clara looked at him. She understood this clearly and completely. This was not a check-in. This was a demonstration a man sent to stand in her space and let her understand physically, in the way that bypasses language entirely, that she was alone and that being alone had consequences. She picked up her pencil from the table. She wrote something on the top page of the index, the date, the time, the name, Wade Colton, and the words sent by Whitlock to intimidate arrived at noon, ranch owner absent. She wrote it clearly, visibly, in full view of Colton. He watched her write. His expression shifted. What are you doing? He said. Keeping records, she said pleasantly. I keep very detailed records. Ask anyone. She set the pencil down. I'll let Mr. Rowan know you came by. I'm sure he'll want to call on Mr. Whitlock to discuss the visit. Colton looked at her for a long moment. The flat assessment of a man recalibrating. You're a long way from Pennsylvania, he said. I am, Clara said. And yet here I am. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he stepped back off the porch. He walked to his horse. He mounted without looking back and rode out. Clara let out a slow, quiet breath. She sat down. She looked at what she had written on the page, the record of a threat, and she thought about Alice Garner keeping quiet for 6 years, and Margaret Rowan writing in a cloth-covered journal that no one had opened since she died, and she thought about 11 families and 15 years and a man who had built an empire on the certainty that no one was looking closely. She picked up the pencil. She kept writing. Samuel came back from town that afternoon with 2 things feed that they actually needed and a piece of information he had collected the way a careful person collects things without appearing to try. Mary Grange is telling people in town that you forged the survey record, he said. He said it in the tone of someone delivering a fact because that was what it was. She's saying you brought it from Pennsylvania, that it's not a real county document. Clara set down her coffee cup. Who is she telling? Whoever will listen, Samuel said. The mercantile, the feed store. I heard it twice in 2 separate conversations that I happened to be near. Did you hear it from people who believed her? Samuel thought about it. 1 person who seemed to. 2 who seemed uncertain, like they were filing it away and waiting to see. Good, Clara said. Samuel looked at her. Good. She's panicking, Clara said. If Whitlock were confident, he would let the 30-day audit process work the way he designed it to work. He wouldn't be sending Colton to the ranch and spreading stories through Mary Grange unless he thought we had something that actually threatened him. She looked at the pages in front of her. This means we're closer than I realized. Samuel sat down across from her. He looked at the organized papers, the index, the stack of documented evidence that had been growing on this table for days. He looked at Clara's face, which was tired and focused in equal measure. What do we do about the story she's spreading? He said. Nothing yet, Clara said. Not directly. The worst thing we can do is respond to it in the street because then we're defending ourselves instead of presenting what we've found. She paused. But I need to know who in this town is listening to her and who isn't. Who has reasons of their own to want this to come out. Deputy Cole, Samuel said. Yes. She looked at him. There may be others. People who have had dealings with Whitlock over the years that didn't go the way they expected. People who have small reasons to want him checked. She paused. I need you to think. Who in Ash Creek owes Whitlock something, and who does Whitlock owe something back to? Samuel was quiet for a moment. He was thinking, and she could see him thinking, pulling up faces and conversations, and the accumulated observation of a boy who had spent years being overlooked in rooms where adults talked freely because they forgot he was listening. Reverend Calhoun, Samuel said finally. The one on the East End. Whitlock donated the new church bell 3 years ago. Made a big show of it. But I heard once that the donation came with an understanding about what the Reverend would and wouldn't say from the pulpit about certain business matters. He paused. The Reverend didn't look happy about it. Who else? Jim Lacey at the hotel. He borrowed from Whitlock's private lending source to build out the 2nd floor 5 years ago. He's been paying it back ever since. I don't know the terms, but I know Jim Lacey walks on eggshells around anything connected to Whitlock. Is he afraid of him, or is he angry? Clara said. Samuel thought. Both, he said. But angry more, I think. When someone mentions Whitlock's name, Jim Lacey's face does something that isn't gratitude. Clara wrote both names down. She looked at the list. What about Mr. Hendricks at the county seat? Samuel said. He helped us. He told me to come back. Hendricks is the most important one, Clara said, and the most exposed. If Whitlock finds out Hendricks gave us the survey records, Hendricks loses his position at minimum. She paused. We need to move fast enough that Whitlock can't get to Hendricks before we have everything in front of a judge. Elias gets back in 5 days, Samuel said. 4 if the roads are clear, Clara said. And between now and then, Clara looked at the pages on the table. 4 days. Whitlock spreading a story that the survey record was forged. Colton riding the fence line. The 30-day notice ticking down. Alice Garner reaching out to 4 families who had been pushed off their land and had been living with it ever since. Between now and then, Clara said, we make the case so complete that when he tries to say the document is forged, the document speaks for itself. And when he tries to say, I'm just a frightened girl from Pennsylvania with no standing here. She stopped. She looked at the index, the careful pages of work that had grown from a wooden box at the bottom of a set of stairs. He finds out what Margaret Rowan already knew. She picked up her pencil. That a woman who has been overlooked long enough learns to do her best work in the quiet. Samuel looked at her across the table. He was 16 years old, and he had grown up certain that the world had no particular use for him, and he had come to this ranch and found a man who treated him with steady, unspectacular decency. And now he had found this woman who thought in straight lines through complicated things, and who had handed him a horse and a list, and trusted him with something that mattered. I'll go back to Alice Garner tomorrow, he said, to see if she's reached the others. Thank you, Samuel, Clara said. She said it simply without making a production of it, which was the way she gave him things directly cleanly, without the performance of gratitude that made a person feel they were being managed. He nodded. He got up. He went to the bunkhouse. Clara sat alone at the table as the lamp burned low and wrote until her hand ached and her eyes were tired. And when she finally stopped and looked up, the kitchen was completely dark beyond the lamp circle, and the wind was doing its nighttime work against the house. She put the pages away. She went upstairs. She turned the lock. She lay in the dark and thought about Elias riding toward Miles City with a saddlebag full of evidence, and she thought about Alice Garner with Margaret's notes tucked inside her coat, and she thought about Samuel with his careful questions and his good memory and his knowledge of surveying inherited from a father who had left. She thought about Margaret Rowan sitting at this table, or one very like it, writing in a cloth-covered journal, and knowing something was wrong, and building page by page the beginning of a case that had waited 5 years for someone to find it. She thought about Caleb Whitlock in his office writing in his careful hand, and being certain that he was certain. She closed her eyes. She was not afraid, she realized. She had been afraid on the train. She had been afraid on the platform at Ash Creek watching that enormous sky. She had been afraid in so many rooms for so many years that fear had become a kind of weather she lived inside without noticing it anymore. But lying in this room in this house, with the lock on the inside of the door, and the evidence hidden carefully, and the network of people she had built. One careful conversation at a time. She was not afraid. She was something else, something tighter and cleaner than fear. Something that did not have a name, but that felt like the specific readiness of a person who has spent their whole life preparing for something without knowing what it was. She did not know yet that Whitlock had already made his real move. She did not know that 3 days ago, the day before Cole delivered the notice, the day before Colton rode the fence line. Whitlock had sent a letter to a circuit judge in Helena, a man named Thurston, who had ruled in Whitlock's favor before, and who owed Whitlock a specific and documented favor from a land transaction 6 years past. The letter requested that Judge Thurston handle the review of the Rowan tax assessment personally when it came to court as a matter of ensuring local stability. She did not know that Judge Thurston had already agreed, and she did not know that Samuel riding back from Alice Garner's the following afternoon would find the road blocked by 2 of Whitlock's men, who would take him off his horse and hold him by both arms, while a third man went through his coat pockets and found Alice Garner's written statement and her copy of Margaret's notes. She did not know any of this, but she would know it all by sundown the following day, and when she did, the careful, methodical, patient strategy she had been building would have to become something else entirely, something faster, something more dangerous, something that left no room for the quiet she had learned to work inside of, because Caleb Whitlock had just made his first real mistake. He had put his hands on Samuel Carter, and that Clara Whitmore had not been prepared for the specific white-hot clarity of what she felt when Samuel walked through the door with dirt on his coat and a cut on his jaw, and the look on his face of a boy who had been reminded forcibly that the world had never intended to be kind to him. She had not been prepared for how much it mattered. She had not been prepared for the fact that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, without deciding to, she had started to love this strange, careful, prickly, overlooked boy, like he was something that belonged to her, like he was family, like losing him would cost her something she could not calculate. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and put her hands on his face and looked at the cut on his jaw and said his name once, just once, and the steadiness in her voice cost her every bit of control she had. "I'm all right," Samuel said. His voice was steady too, which cost him the same. "I know you are," she said. She dropped her hands. She stepped back. She breathed. "Tell me everything." He told her. And Clara Whitmore, who had burned a letter on a platform in Pennsylvania and come west with nothing and found something she had never expected to find, stood in the kitchen of a ranch in Montana Territory and listened to a boy describe being stopped on a road and robbed of the evidence they had worked for, and she felt the fear arrive at last. Not the old fear, the quiet weather of her childhood, but something sharper and more specific. Not fear for herself. Fear for all of them. And then underneath the fear, something else. Something that had been building since the first morning she had stood on this porch and watched that impossible sky come up gold all at once without apology. She was angry. And the anger, unlike the fear, had a direction. She sent a rider to Miles City that same night. Not Elias. Elias didn't know yet. She sent Jim Pryor, the rancher 2 miles south, who had once told Elias casually over a fence line that he had lost a timber contract to Whitlock's interference and had never forgotten it. Clara had filed that detail away 3 weeks ago when Elias mentioned it and had not known why she was filing it. Now she knew. She knocked on Pryor's door at 8 in the evening with a sealed letter in her hand and looked at the man who answered and said without preamble, "I need this letter to reach Elias Rowan in Miles City as fast as a horse can carry it. I need it done quietly, and I need it done tonight. And I need you to do it because you have your own reasons to want Caleb Whitlock's reach reduced." Pryor looked at her for a long moment. He was a large, slow-spoken man who did not make decisions quickly, but made them solidly. He looked at the letter. He looked at her face. "My son lost a surveying contract 2 years ago," he said. "Whitlock undercut him with his own man after my boy did all the preliminary work. We never could prove it was deliberate." "No," Clara said. "But I can prove 15 years of the same pattern, if I can get my lawyer here in time." Pryor took the letter. "I'll ride myself," he said. "Faster than sending the boy." "Thank you," Clara said. She walked back to the ranch in the dark and went into the kitchen and sat down across from Samuel, who had washed the cut on his jaw and changed his coat and was sitting at the table with the specific stillness of someone who was holding themselves together by staying very quiet. "What did they take?" she said. She had asked this already, but she needed to go through it again, methodically. "Alice Garner's written statement," Samuel said. "Her copy of Margaret's notes, the list of families I was bringing back." He paused. "Not the index. The index was here." "The original survey record." "Here. You never let it leave the house." "The account ledger." "Here." "Margaret's notes, the originals." "Here," Clara breathed. "Then they took copies," she said. "They took copies and they took a statement, but they don't have the originals, and they don't have the full index, and they don't have what Mr. Hendricks gave you the first time." She paused. "What they have is enough to know we are further along than they realized. That's why they took it, not to destroy our case, to understand how much of one we have." Samuel looked at her. "Does Alice Garner know they took her statement?" "Not yet." Clara stood. "I need to get to her before Whitlock does." "Clara." Samuel said her name in the tone of someone about to say something they know will not be well received. "It's dark. The road where they stopped me, they'll have someone watching it." "I know," she said. "I won't take the road." She was already getting her coat. "I'll take the south pasture fence line to the Pemberton property. It adds an hour, but it stays off every road Whitlock's men would watch." "I'll come with you," Samuel said. "You'll stay here," she said. "If both of us leave and someone comes—" She stopped, put her coat on, looked at him. "I need you here, Samuel. This is not a small thing I'm asking you to do." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. He did not argue further, which told her everything about how much he had grown in 3 weeks from a boy who maintained distance as a survival strategy to someone who could hold a position because he understood why it mattered. She went out into the dark. She had never navigated that fence line at night. She had walked it twice in daylight, checking the posts the way Elias had shown her, and she had paid attention, the way she paid attention to everything, not knowing she was memorizing it, just doing it because it was her habit to understand the physical logic of whatever space she was moving through. That habit served her now. She moved along the fence by feel and by the particular quality of the ground underfoot, and the Montana sky was enormous and clear above her, and full of stars that gave enough light to make the fence line visible as a darker edge against the grass. She reached the Pemberton farm in just over an hour. Alice Garner answered the door in her nightclothes with a lantern and a rifle. When she saw Clara, she lowered the rifle, but not the alarm in her face. "What happened?" she said. Clara told her, standing in the doorway, quickly and completely. Alice listened without interrupting. When Clara finished, Alice was quiet for a moment. "He took my statement," Alice said. "Yes." "He knows I talked." "Yes." Alice looked at her. "He'll go to the Pembertons," she said. "He has a lease arrangement with them. He can make things very difficult for this family if he decides to." "How soon can you write a second statement?" Clara said. "A new one more detailed than the first, signed and dated and witnessed by someone I can get to this house tonight." Alice blinked. "Tonight? If they took the first statement, it's because they think eliminating it eliminates you," Clara said. "The way to answer that is to immediately have a second one that is better than the first, witnessed by multiple people, impossible to claim was fabricated." She paused. "Reverend Calhoun, the East End Church. Samuel told me Whitlock bought his silence 3 years ago with a bell. Is Calhoun a man who has been uncomfortable about that?" Alice looked at her steadily. "You have been here 3 weeks, she said. "Is he?" Clara said. "Yes," Alice said. "He's been uncomfortable about it since the day he accepted it. Then he'd witness your statement if given the opportunity to do something that partially addresses that discomfort." At 10 o'clock at night. "Men with troubled consciences don't sleep well," Clara said. "He'll answer the door." Alice Garner looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned back into the house and said, "Give me 5 minutes to dress." They reached Reverend Calhoun's residence, attached to the East Church, at 10:30. He answered the door in his dressing gown and looked at Alice Garner and Clara Whitmore on his porch with an expression that moved through surprise and into something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. The expression of a man being given an exit from a room he had been locked in for 3 years. "I know why you've come," he said. He looked at Clara. "You're the Whitmore girl." "Yes," Clara said. "Come in," he said. They were there for 2 hours. Alice wrote a new statement, longer, more detailed, organized by Clara's careful questions, while Calhoun made coffee and sat at his own table and read each page as it was completed with the focused attention of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at and what it meant for him to put his name on it as witness. When Alice finished and signed, Calhoun read the full statement through once more. Then he picked up his own pen. "I have something to add," he said quietly, "if you'll include it." Clara looked at him. "3 years ago," he said, "Whitlock came to me before the bell, before the donation. He came to me about the Garner family specifically. He told me that if I counseled any member of this congregation to support Alice's challenge to the tax assessment, the church's own building loan, which was held through the same private lending source that funded the hotel expansion, would be called in." He paused. "He told me he would call it within 30 days. The congregation would lose the building." He looked at Alice. "I did not counsel anyone. I told myself I had no choice. I have been telling myself that for 3 years." The kitchen was very quiet. "Write it down," Clara said gently. "All of it. Exactly as you said it." He wrote it down. He signed it. He dated it. Clara folded both documents and put them inside her coat against her ribs, next to her own heartbeat, and walked back to the ranch in the dark, with the stars overhead, and the fence line under her hand, and the specific lightness of someone carrying something that is heavy in the best possible way. She got back at 2 in the morning. Samuel was still at the table. He had not slept. He looked up when she came in, read her face and said, "You got it." Better than what they took, she said. She put the documents on the table. She sat down. She looked at them for a moment. Calhoun witnessed and added testimony of his own. Direct intimidation of a religious leader. That is not a land tax dispute anymore, Samuel. That is a pattern of coercion across multiple institutions. Samuel looked at the documents. He looked at Clara. When does Elias get back? He said. If Pryor rode fast, she said. And if Elias leaves at first light 3 days, maybe 2.5. And if Whitlock moves before then? Clara looked at him steadily. Then we handle it, she said. They did not handle it the way she expected. The next morning, Whitlock did not send Colton. He did not send a rider or a legal notice or a message through Mary Grange. He came himself, and he brought 2 men with him, and he arrived at 9 in the morning when the yard was empty of everyone except Clara, who was on the porch with her coffee cup and had seen them coming up the road from far enough away to have time to think. She thought quickly. She set down her coffee cup. She went inside. She got the index and the originals, all of them, and put them in the hiding place. She came back out. She stood on the porch. Whitlock rode into the yard and dismounted with the ease of a man dismounting in someone else's yard who has decided it is already his. His 2 men stayed on their horses, one at each side, present visible, saying nothing, meaning everything. Miss Whitmore, Whitlock said, the pleasant voice, the social face. I was hoping to catch Elias this morning. He's away, Clara said. Still. Whitlock looked around the yard. Not searching, performing a survey. A man measuring what he considers his. I heard there was some trouble on the road yesterday. One of my men mentioned seeing your ranch hand in some kind of difficulty. Your men created the difficulty, Clara said. Still pleasant, still even. Something shifted in Whitlock's face, just slightly, the social warmth thinning. I'm not sure what you mean, he said. I think you are, Clara said. 2 of your men stopped Samuel Carter on the South Road, took him off his horse, and went through his pockets. They took documents that belonged to this ranch. She paused. That's theft, Mr. Whitlock. It doesn't stop being theft because the men doing it work for you. Whitlock looked at her for a moment. He had recalibrated her twice now, once when she met him at the door with composed nothing. Once when she told him to his face what she thought of his visit. She watched him recalibrate again, and this time there was less pleasantness in it. You're a long way from home, he said. A different tone now, not the social voice. Something quieter and more honest, which was somehow more threatening than anything he had said before. And you've been here, 3 weeks? You don't know this valley. You don't know how things work here. And I think someone as intelligent as you clearly are should consider very carefully whether the position you're putting yourself in is one you can actually sustain. Which position is that? Clara said. Standing between me and something I intend to have, he said. The yard was very quiet. The 2 men on horses had not moved. The wind was doing its usual work. A horse shifted in the corral. Mr. Whitlock, Clara said. She came down off the porch steps. She stopped at the bottom, which put her closer to him than she had been, which she did deliberately. I want to be honest with you, because I think you're a man who prefers directness when you're in private, whatever face you put on in company. She looked at him straight. You have been doing what you do in this valley for 15 years. You have been doing it to families who didn't have the resources to document it, didn't have the connections to fight it, and didn't have anyone standing beside them who was willing to look at the full shape of what you were doing. She paused. That situation has changed. Whitlock looked at her. His face was very still now. The pleasant man had gone entirely, and what was left was something older and more direct. The face of a man who was used to having this kind of conversation from a position of complete certainty, and who was experiencing possibly for the first time the minor uncertainty of not being able to categorize the person he was talking to. You have nothing, he said. Whatever you think you found. 11 families, Clara said. 15 years. A county clerk who has been keeping records and waiting. A deputy who told me I had 30 days, and that was enough time if I knew what I was doing. A reverend who has been sitting with a guilty conscience for 3 years and has now written down exactly what you said to him. She paused. And Margaret Rowan's notes, which she spent 2 years compiling, and which were waiting in a wooden box for someone to find them. She paused again. "I found them, Mr. Whitlock." The silence this time was a different quality than the ones before it. It was the silence of a man absorbing something he had not anticipated and making rapid calculations about what it cost him. "Margaret Rowan has been dead for 5 years," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "And her work has been waiting for 5 years. And I have been here for 3 weeks, and a lawyer named Harlan Voss is writing from Miles City right now with copies of everything I just described." This was not precisely true, yet Voss had been contacted, but not confirmed. She said it the way she said things she intended to make true. "And Alice Garner has a new statement witnessed by Reverend Calhoun, describing in detail what was done to her family and what was said to the Reverend." She looked at him. "You took the first statement. You didn't make us afraid. You made us faster." Whitlock looked at her for a long time. "You are 18 years old," he said. "Not contemptuous, something more complicated than that. The statement of a man reckoning with a miscalculation." "Yes," Clara said. "I am." He put his hat back on. He had been holding it, she realized, for the last several minutes, which was unlike him. He looked at her one more time. She held it. He turned. He mounted his horse. His 2 men turned with him. He rode out of the yard without looking back, and Clara stood at the bottom of the porch steps and watched him go and did not move until the sound of hooves was completely gone. Then she sat down on the bottom porch step and put her face in her hands and breathed for about 30 seconds. Just breathed, felt the shake in her hands that she had not permitted to be there while he was in front of her. She let it happen now, privately, briefly. Then she lifted her head. She stood up. She went inside. She had work to do. Elias came back in 2.5 days, which meant Pryor had ridden hard. He came through the gate at midday with a man beside him who was perhaps 60 lean, with a face like old leather, and eyes that moved across whatever they looked at with the specific assessment of someone who had spent 40 years evaluating evidence and had gotten very good at knowing what mattered and what didn't. Harlan Voss. Clara met them in the yard. She looked at Elias, and he looked at her, and the entire conversation of the past. 5 days passed between them in about 3 seconds. Not words, not even exactly expression, but the particular communication of 2 people who had been thinking about each other from a distance and were now recalibrating the distance to 0. "You're all right," Elias said. Not a question. "I'm all right," she said. "Samuel's all right. Come inside. There's a lot to tell you." She told him everything in order completely. She told it with Voss at the table taking notes, and Voss asked 3 questions during the telling sharp specific lawyer's questions that went to the exact structural elements of the legal case, and each question Clara answered with the specific document or testimony that addressed it, and each time she did, Voss wrote something in his notebook and said nothing further. When she finished, Voss sat back in his chair and looked at the organized papers on the table, and then at Clara. "How long did it take you to build this?" he said. 3 weeks, she said. "You've organized this better than most trained legal clerks would have," he said. "The index alone, the way you've cross-referenced the testimony against the documentary evidence, that's not something most people know to do." "I kept accounts for 2 years, Clara said. "Everything is a ledger if you look at it right." Voss looked at Elias. "Where did you find her?" he said. "Pennsylvania," Elias said. There was something in his voice when he said it. Voss looked back at the papers. "The judge is the problem," he said. "Thurston is Whitlock's. I know his record. If this goes to him for the tax assessment review, he will find a way to resolve it in Whitlock's favor, regardless of what you have." He paused. "We need to get this in front of a different jurisdiction before Thurston has a chance to act. Which means we need to move this from a county tax dispute, which falls under Thurston's circuit, to a federal fraud and coercion case, which goes to the district court in Helena." "Can you do that?" Elias said. "With what she's built here," Voss said. He looked at the index again. "Yes, I believe I can. The Reverend's testimony alone, direct interference with a religious institution, documented coercion, that's federal territory. Combined with the pattern across 11 families, the altered county records, the physical intimidation of a minor." He looked at Samuel. "How old are you, son?" 16, Samuel said. They put their hands on a 16-year-old on a public road, Voss said. That's in the statement. In Clara's index, Samuel said. She wrote it down the night it happened. Voss looked at Clara. You wrote it down the night it happened. I keep detailed records, Clara said. I wrote it in front of Colton when he came to intimidate me, so he would know I was recording. I wrote it again that evening with the full detail. Voss made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in that direction. He picked up his pen. All right, he said. Here is what we are going to do, and we are going to do it in this order. He told them. It was specific, and it was fast, and it required 3 things to happen simultaneously, within the next 48 hours. And when he finished laying it out, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. Can we do all 3 in 48 hours? Elias said. We have to, Clara said. Because the next morning, Ash Creek got its twist. Mary Grange walked into the town meeting, a regular monthly gathering at the school hall that Ash Creek used to discuss community matters, and stood up in front of 40 people, and stated loudly, and with the confidence of someone who believed they were delivering the finishing blow, that Clara Whitmore had come to Montana with forged documents, that she had manipulated Elias Rowan's household for personal gain, and that the so-called evidence she had been presenting around town was fabricated by a girl with no standing, no family, and no honesty. Clara was in the meeting. She had known the meeting was happening. She had come because Voss had told her to come, and Voss had told her to come because he had known somehow, with the instinct of a man who had watched 40 years of these moves, that this was when Whitlock would make it public. She sat in the 3rd row and listened to Mary Grange say every word, and did not move, and did not change her expression. When Grange finished, the room turned to look at Clara. Clara stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage. She stood up, and she spoke the way she had learned to speak at this table in front of Harlan Voss, who had told her, say the facts, say them in order, say them once, and let them stand. The survey record is certified by the county clerk, she said. His name is Mr. Hendricks, and he is prepared to testify to its authenticity in federal district court in Helena. A pause. The tax ledger discrepancy is documented by a receipt that Elias Rowan has held in a locked box for 8 years. The receipt shows the correct payment. The altered ledger entry was made by Gerald Pruitt, who also kept books for Caleb Whitlock's operation. Another pause. The testimony of Alice Garner, Ruth Caldwell Tom Briggs, and 7 other families who lost land in this valley over the past 15 years has been compiled, witnessed, and submitted to federal jurisdiction as of this morning. She looked around the room, and Reverend Calhoun has provided a signed witnessed statement describing direct coercion by Caleb Whitlock of a religious institution using a debt instrument as a threat against pastoral speech. She stopped. These are not my claims. These are documents. They exist. They have been submitted. Anyone who wishes to see them may speak to Harlan Voss, who is a land attorney currently present in Ash Creek and who is representing this matter in federal court. She sat back down. The room was very quiet. Mary Grange said, "She's lying." "Mrs. Grange," said Deputy Cole from the back of the room. His voice was clear and steady, and had the particular quality of a man who had been waiting for a specific moment and had recognized it arriving. "I delivered the tax assessment notice to the Rowan property myself. I have read the documents Miss Whitmore is referencing. They are not fabrications." He paused. "That is my professional assessment as a deputy of this county." Mary Grange sat down. Clara did not look at Cole. She looked straight ahead. But she felt something in her chest that was the specific warmth of being believed by someone who had nothing to gain from believing you except the satisfaction of the truth. Whitlock was not at the meeting. He had not come. And his absence in a room where his name was being said, this many times in this many ways, was itself a kind of answer. The absence of a man who had realized sometime in the past 48 hours that the ground had shifted under him, and that being present for this particular moment was not to his advantage. After the meeting outside in the afternoon air, people came to Clara. Not all of them, but enough. Jim Lacey from the hotel, who shook her hand and said nothing, but whose grip was firm and deliberate. A woman she had seen in the mercantile who said her brother-in-law had lost a timber contract and had always believed it was not an accident. Two ranchers from the North Valley who had had dealings with Whitlock's lending operation and had always felt the terms were not what they'd been told. One by one, not a flood, a river starting to run. Elias was waiting for her when she came out. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, not pushing through it, letting the people come to her, and when the last of them had gone, and it was just the two of them on the dusty street, he looked at her with the expression she had been learning to read since the wagon ride from the station. "You were afraid in there," he said. "Not accusation, knowledge." "Yes," she said. "Nobody could tell." "I know. I've had a lot of practice." She looked at him, the afternoon light on his face, the weathered, steady, unhurried face of a man who had given her a room with a lock and a choice and an account book and let her find her own way toward something worth fighting for. Elias. He filed the notice because he thought he had time. He sent Colton because he thought intimidation would work. He sent Mary Grange today because he thought destroying my credibility would stop this. She paused. He has been wrong 3 times. When do you think he stops being wrong and starts doing something we aren't expecting? Elias was quiet for a moment. Voss thinks within the week, he said. Once the federal filing is confirmed, Whitlock's local leverage disappears, and he knows it. He'll make a move before the filing is confirmed. What kind of move? The kind he doesn't send someone else to make, Elias said. They looked at each other on the street, and the afternoon moved around them, and Clara thought about a man who had been certain for 15 years, and was now for the first time not certain. Then we don't give him the week, she said. We give him 2 days. Voss files tomorrow. We get confirmation before Whitlock has time to act. She looked at Elias steadily. Can Voss do it that fast? I'll ask him tonight, Elias said. Tonight, she confirmed. He looked at her for a moment more, then quietly in the voice he used for things he had been deciding whether to say, I need you to know something. She waited. When I got Pryor's message in Miles City, when I understood what had happened while I was gone, what you had done. He stopped, started again. I rode back faster than I have ridden anywhere in 5 years, he said. Not for the land, not for the case. He looked at her. For you. Because I needed to see that you were all right with my own eyes. Because somewhere between the account book and the root cellar, and the way you talked to Samuel, and the way you burned that letter before you ever got on the train. He stopped again. His jaw was tight. I am not good at saying things like this. You're doing fine, Clara said quietly. I need you to know that whatever happens with the land, he said, whatever Voss files, and whatever judge sees it, and whatever Whitlock does in the next 2 days, you are not a strategy to me. You are not a solution to a problem. You are, he breathed. You are the reason the house stopped being quiet, he said. And I don't know how to go back to quiet now. I don't think I could. Clara looked at him on the dusty street of Ash Creek, with the afternoon going gold around them, and felt the truth of what he was saying. Land in her chest, like something that had been meant to be there, and had finally arrived. You don't have to go back to it, she said. He looked at her. Something in his face released not dramatically, not a collapse. Just the particular release of something held for a very long time, finally allowed to rest. All right, he said, the word that meant everything between them. All right, she said back. They walked back to the ranch together in the late afternoon light, not touching, not needing to moving at the same pace through the same world. And Samuel was on the porch when they came through the gate, and he looked at both of them and said nothing, but the thing he did not say was visible in his face. Relief, relief. The specific relief of someone for whom the stability of other people is not a small thing. Voss is inside, Samuel said. Good, Clara said. Tell him we need the filing done tomorrow. Samuel looked at her. Tomorrow, she said. She went inside. That night, Harlan Voss worked at the kitchen table until midnight, while Clara sat across from him and answered every question he had and organized every document he needed and cross-referenced every testimony against every piece of physical evidence. And at midnight, Voss set down his pen and looked at the completed filing in front of him and said, In 40 years, I have built cases with more resources, more time, and trained staff. I have never built one this well organized. He paused. You did this in 3 weeks. I had good source material, Clara said. Margaret Rowan did most of the foundational work. Margaret Rowan started it, Voss said. You finished it. There's a difference. He looked at her. What are you going to do after this? Clara looked at the filing on the table, then at the kitchen, at the account book on the shelf, and the oil lamp, and the books along the wall, and the stairs that led up to a room with a lock she had not turned in a week because she had stopped needing to check that it was there. I'm going to stay, she said. Voss nodded as if this were the most sensible thing he had heard all evening. He gathered the papers. He went to bed. Clara sat alone at the table in the quiet house and listened to the Montana wind and thought about the morning Elias would ride to file the papers. She thought about what came after the confirmation, the hearing the testimony of 11 families who had been waiting years for the chance to be believed. She thought about it not with fear, but with the clean, forward-leaning readiness of someone who has been building toward something and can finally see the shape of what it is. She put out the lamp. She went upstairs. She did not turn the lock. She lay in the dark and listened to the house breathing around her old walls, the sound of a place that had been lonely for 5 years and had started tentatively to be something else. She thought about wildflowers that grow on their own and are left because they deserve to be there. She thought about a boy in a bunkhouse who had stopped eating breakfast alone. She thought about a man who had said, "I don't know how to go back to quiet," and had meant it as the most honest thing he had ever said out loud. She closed her eyes. She was almost asleep when she heard it. The sound was wrong. Not the wind, not the house, not a horse in the corral. Something deliberate, something moving with purpose around the outside of the barn, and then a sound that her sleeping mind registered before her waking mind did, and brought her upright in the bed with her heart already ahead of her thoughts. The smell reached her a second later. Smoke. She was down the stairs before the smell fully reached her lungs. She did not stop for shoes. She did not stop for a coat. She hit the bottom of the stairs and turned for the kitchen and grabbed the 2 buckets by the back door and was through it before she had consciously decided to move, running on the pure animal knowledge that fire in a barn means horses, and horses cannot open their own doors. The barn was not fully caught yet. One wall, the south-facing one, had the fire climbing it in a thin line, deliberately set low. The kind of fire a man starts when he wants something to burn slowly enough that he is gone before it is noticed. She understood this in half a second and used the understanding. She had time. Not much. Enough. She got the barn door open and went in, and the horses were already moving, already pushing against their stalls with the specific terror of animals who know what fire means in a way that bypasses all other instinct. She got Elias's bay out first. Then the roan, talking the whole time in the low, steady voice that Samuel had taught her, worked better than anything else. Not the words, but the tone, the human sound saying, "I am here, I am calm, we are moving, follow the sound." She got all 4 horses out into the yard before the fire reached the hay stored in the south corner, and when it hit the hay, it stopped being a slow fire and became something else entirely. She stood in the yard with 4 horses pulling at the ropes she'd looped around her arm and screamed for Elias, who was already coming out of the house. Samuel was 3 steps behind him. Voss appeared in the doorway, took one look, and went back inside. She understood a second later. Why, when he came back out with the saddlebag that held the federal filing wrapped in the waterproof covering tucked under his arm, like something more important than himself, which it was. "Everyone out," Elias said. He was already taking the ropes from her arm. 4 horses, she said. "I got all 4. He looked at her hands. She looked down. Her palms were red from the ropes, not burned, just rope burned, and she had not felt it until he looked. "I'm fine," she said. Samuel had the pump going. He and Voss worked it together, and the water hit the barn wall, and the fire hissed and fought back, and the 4 of them worked through the next hour, in the particular focused silence of people doing what needs doing without discussion, because there is no time for discussion, and they all understand this equally. By the time 2 neighboring ranch hands rode in, Pryor and his son, who had seen the light from 2 miles off, the fire was contained. The south wall was gone. The rest of the barn stood. The horses were unhurt. Clara sat down on the water trough in the yard and let herself shake. Elias came and stood beside her. He did not say anything. He put his hand on her back between her shoulder blades and left it there, steady, warm, the hand of a man who understood that sometimes the right thing was not words. She breathed. She stopped shaking. She looked up. "He did this," she said. "Yes," Elias said. "Because the filing is tomorrow and he is out of time," she said. "Yes." "Voss still has the papers." "In his hands," Elias said. "He didn't put them down once." Clara looked across the yard to where Voss was standing with the saddlebag still under his arm, talking to Pryor in a low voice, his face doing the specific alert calculation of a lawyer assessing new evidence. Because that was what this was now. Not just arson. Evidence. One more piece of the pattern. One more thing documented witnessed added to the case. "This helps us," Clara said. Elias looked at her. "The barn is half gone." "I know," she said. "And 2 men from a neighboring ranch saw it burning and came. And tomorrow Voss files and the arson is part of the federal complaint." She looked at him. "He tried to frighten us off the land the night before the filing. That is not the action of a man who thinks he is going to win through legitimate process." Elias looked at her for a long moment, the gray eyes in the firelight steady reading her. "You figured that out while you were shaking," he said. "I figure things out when I'm scared," she said. "I always have. It's what my family called thinking too much." He looked at her for another moment. Then very quietly, "It's what I call the thing that is going to save this ranch." She held his gaze, the warmth of his hand still between her shoulder blades, the night around them going cool, the fire smell in everything, the horses settling in the corral where Samuel had moved them, the stars overhead doing what Montana stars did, everything everywhere without apology. "Go to bed," she said. "What's left of the night. I'll take first watch." "Clara, I'm not going to sleep," she said simply. "And one of us should. You're riding to the county seat at first light." She looked at him steadily. "Go." He went. But before he did, he looked at her one more time, in the way he had the look that said things he had not yet found the words for, and that she had learned to receive without looking away. She sat watch until dawn. Deputy Cole arrived at the ranch at 7 in the morning, before Elias had returned from the county seat, before Voss had finished his coffee, and before Clara had slept a single hour. He came alone, which told her something. A man acting on official orders from Whitlock's connections would have brought someone with him. A man acting on his own conscience came alone. "There's been a complaint filed," Cole said. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, hat in his hand. "Against Whitlock, by me. Last night after I saw the fire from the road." He paused. "I document the things I see, Miss Whitmore. Same as you." Clara looked at him across the kitchen. She was very tired, and her hands still ached from the rope burns, and the smell of smoke was in her hair, and she thought she had never in her life been so glad to see another person. "Sit down, Deputy Cole," she said. "There's coffee." He sat down. He wrapped both hands around the cup she gave him. He looked at the table, at the clean space where the documents had been now filed, now gone to where they needed to be. "Judge Thurston has been notified of the federal filing," Cole said. "He won't be able to touch the tax assessment case now. It's out of his jurisdiction the moment the federal court accepts it." He paused. "The federal court accepted it at 6:45 this morning." Clara set down her own cup. "How do you know that?" "Because I was there," he said. "I rode to the county seat last night after I saw the fire, and I added my own statement to Voss's filing. Witness to intimidation. Witness to the altered notification process. Witness to the arson." He looked at her. "And I brought something else. Something I have been holding on to for 2 years because I didn't know what to do with it." He reached into his coat and set a folded document on the table. Clara picked it up. She unfolded it. She read it. It was a letter. Written by Gerald Pruitt, 18 months before he died. Written apparently to no one in particular, or to whoever found it, which was the same thing. It described in the careful language of a man who knew he was confessing exactly what he had done to the ledger records of 6 ranches in the Ash Creek Valley at Caleb Whitlock's direction, and why he had done it, and what he had been paid, and what he had been threatened with when he suggested stopping. "Where did you find this?" Clara said. Her voice was very controlled. "In Pruitt's effects after he died," Cole said. His wife gave me his papers to sort through for anything legally relevant. This was in an envelope at the bottom of a box. He paused. I've been sitting on it because I didn't know who to trust with it, and because I was... He stopped. His jaw tightened. Because I was afraid, he said, of what Whitlock would do if I moved against him with one document and nothing else. I needed someone to build the rest of it before I could bring this out. Clara looked at the letter. She looked at Cole. She thought about a chain of people Margaret Rowan writing in a cloth journal, Alice Garner sending letters across 2 years, Mr. Hendricks keeping records and waiting, Cole sitting on a confession letter for 2 years, all of them holding pieces of a thing, all of them waiting for someone to put the pieces together. All of them waiting in their different ways for someone to walk into this valley and be foolish enough or brave enough or simply desperate enough to look directly at what everyone else had learned not to see. She had come west terrified. She had come with nothing but a burned letter and a suitcase, and 18 years of being told she thought too much. Thank you, she said to Cole. She said it the way she gave things to Samuel directly without performance. For all of it. For the 30-day warning. For the filing. For this. Cole looked at his coffee cup. It was the right thing, he said, as if it were simple. Elias came back at noon. He came through the door and stopped when he saw Cole at the table, and then looked at Clara's face and read it in the way he read everything quickly, accurately, without needing it explained. It's done, he said. It's done, she said. Federal filing confirmed. Pruitt's confession letter added to the evidence. Cole's testimony filed. She paused. It's done, Elias. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He took his hat off. He set it on the hook by the door, which was the most ordinary gesture in the world, and which in that moment meant something that neither of them could have described precisely, but that both of them felt completely. He sat down at the table. Clara poured him coffee. She sat across from him. Cole excused himself quietly and went. He had done what he came to do, and he understood the room. They sat in the kitchen that smelled of smoke and morning, and the particular quiet of something finished. Margaret would have liked you, Elias said. Clara looked at him. You think so? She would have argued with you constantly, he said. She had opinions about everything, and she didn't let them go easily. Something moved through his face. The grief and the warmth of it together inseparable. But she would have liked you. She always respected someone who thought past where most people stopped thinking. I would have liked her too, Clara said. I already do a little, from the notes. Elias looked at his coffee cup. She started something she couldn't finish, he said. You finished it for her. We finished it, Clara said. All of us. Alice Garner, Mr. Hendricks, Cole, Samuel. She paused. You. I mostly rode to Miles City and back, Elias said dryly. You gave me the room with the lock, Clara said. You gave me the account book. You sat at this table and listened to me the first night and didn't tell me I thought too much. She looked at him steadily. You gave me somewhere to put everything I had. That's not nothing, Elias. That is the thing without which none of the rest of it happened. He looked at her. The gray eyes. The weathered, careful, unhurried face. All right, he said. Soft. All right, she said. The hearing was held in Helena 6 weeks later. Harlan Voss argued the case across 4 days before a federal judge named Aldrich, who had a reputation for reading everything twice and forming his opinions slowly and holding them with conviction once formed. He read the index Clara had made. He read Margaret's notes. He read Pruitt's confession. He read 11 family testimonies. He read Cole's account. He read Calhoun's account. He read the certified survey records and the original receipts and the altered ledger entries laid side by side with the receipts that proved what had actually been paid. He asked to meet Clara Whitmore on the morning of the 3rd day. She came into the judge's chambers with Voss beside her and sat in the chair across from Judge Aldrich's desk and folded her hands on her lap, the way she had learned to sit in rooms where the outcome mattered. Aldrich looked at her for a moment. He was perhaps 65, with white hair, and a face that had the particular quality of someone who had spent a lifetime sorting truth from not truth and had gotten very good at it. How old are you? He said. 18, she said. 19 next month. You built this case in 3 weeks, he said. I organized what other people had already gathered, she said. Margaret Rowan built the foundation 2 years before I arrived. I built the index. Don't minimize the index, Aldrich said. He had a copy of it on his desk. I have seen professional legal clerks who couldn't organize evidence this clearly. He paused. Where did you learn to think like this? My family told me I thought too much, she said. So I kept doing it. Aldrich looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his face that was not quite a smile, but was the precursor to one. All right, Miss Whitmore, he said. Go back to your seat. I've seen what I needed to see. On the 4th day, Judge Aldrich issued his ruling. The Rowan land title was confirmed free and clear. The tax assessment notice was invalidated. The altered ledger records were entered into evidence of a criminal fraud scheme. 6 of the 11 affected families were awarded compensatory damages from Whitlock's assets. A criminal referral was made against Caleb Whitlock for fraud, coercion, and destruction of property. The barn documented and witnessed the final piece of a pattern that Aldrich described in his ruling as systematic, deliberate, and conducted with the specific intention of destroying the economic stability of families in the Ash Creek Valley over a period of no less than 15 years. Whitlock's lawyer tried twice to interrupt the reading of the ruling. Aldrich looked at him both times with the expression of a man who had not become a federal judge by being interrupted and said both times, "Sit down, counselor." Clara sat in the 4th row of the Helena courthouse and listened to the ruling read out and felt each piece of it land, like something she had been carrying, being set down one weight at a time, until by the end of it she was the lightest she had been since she stepped off a train at Ash Creek Station 6 weeks ago and looked up at a sky that had no end. Beside her, Alice Garner was crying. Not dramatically, Alice was not a dramatic woman. Just quietly, with her hand pressed to her mouth and her eyes very bright, the cry of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally been told they were right to hold it. Clara put her hand over Alice's. Alice turned her hand over and held on her other side. Elias sat straight and still and said nothing until the ruling was fully read and the gavel came down. Then he exhaled. One long, slow breath. The breath of a man who has been fighting something for 8 years and has just been told he can stop fighting. He turned and looked at Clara. His face was doing the complicated thing it did when he felt something more than he had words for. She looked back at him and held the look and did not need to say anything because the account book and the night with the fire and the wagon ride from the train station were all inside the look, all of it together, the whole 3 weeks that had changed the shape of everything. Samuel was in the row behind them. When Clara turned around, he was looking at his hands. She reached back and put her hand on his shoulder briefly, just briefly, and he looked up and nodded. Once, the nod of someone absorbing something that mattered and choosing not to break it with speech. She nodded back. Whitlock was arrested 3 days later at his office on the main street of Ash Creek. Cole did it himself with 2 deputies from the sheriff's office, and the arrest was made without drama because Whitlock had run out of moves and he understood it. He walked out of his office in the middle of the morning when the street was busy and people were watching, and what Clara heard afterward from 3 different people who had been there was that he had not said a single word. He had simply put on his hat and walked out with the deputies and gotten into the wagon and gone. The silence of a man who had nothing left to say. That afternoon, the main street of Ash Creek was louder than Clara had ever heard it. People who had been careful for years were suddenly not careful. Jim Lacey came out of his hotel and stood on the porch and talked to his neighbors. Reverend Calhoun held an impromptu service at his church that was not really a religious service, but was the kind of gathering people have when they need to be in the same room together and say true things out loud. The Brennan family who ran the mill came into town for the first time in months and shook hands with people they had been avoiding because Whitlock had positioned them carefully on opposite sides of various disputes. Clara stood on the street and watched all of this, and felt the particular satisfaction of someone who has seen a thing clearly and worked toward it and lived to see the working arrive at its intended place. Elias stood beside her. "It won't fix everything," she said. "The families who left the territory, some of them are gone for good. What was taken can't all be returned. No, he said. But some of it can. And the rest of it the way it's been done here quietly and systematically, that stops today. She looked at the street. At Ash Creek, going about the particular business of a community that has just had something heavy lifted off it and is not yet sure how to move in the new lightness. Where does Wade Colton go? She said. And Mary Grange. And all the people who were part of how this worked, not the architects of it, just the people who carried it. Some of them will be all right, Elias said. Some of them will carry it for a long time. And Thurston, the judge. Voss filed a separate complaint against him 2 days ago, Elias said. That process will take longer, but it's filed. Clara nodded. She thought about justice as a thing that moved slowly and imperfectly and was still worth moving toward. She had not believed that once. She had believed that the machinery of the world was arranged against people like her, people with no family and no money and no connections, and that the best a person in that position could do was survive the arrangement quietly. She did not believe that anymore. 3 months after the ruling on a Saturday morning in October, when the Montana hills had turned the particular gold and copper that Clara had never seen in Pennsylvania and did not have words for, Elias came to find her in the barn, where she was going over the winter feed inventory with Samuel. He stood in the barn doorway, the way he sometimes stood, not crowding the space, just present, taking up exactly as much room as he needed and no more. And he looked at her, and she looked at him, and Samuel looked at both of them and found something very interesting to examine on the far side of the corral. I have something to ask you, Elias said. Clara set down her pencil. She waited. Not in the way you might think, he said. I'm not asking you to do anything for me. I'm not asking you to fill something or fix something or become something the ranch needs. He paused. I'm asking you a question, and I want you to know that either answer is the right answer, because the right answer is yours to give. She held his gaze. Do you still choose this life? He said. Not will you marry me. Not the language of transaction of arrangement of a girl being placed somewhere useful. The language of a man who had understood from the first wagon ride that the only thing worth having was the thing freely given. Clara stood in the barn she had helped rebuild in the ranch. She had helped save in the valley she had come to terrified and had learned to love, and she thought about an 18-year-old girl on a train platform, striking a match against an iron post and burning the last letter from a family that did not want her. She thought about the lock on the inside of the door, about account books and grain bins and root cellars, about Margaret's notes in a wooden box, and Alice Garner's hand turning over to hold hers in a Helena courthouse, about a boy who had stopped eating breakfast alone, about an impossible sky that went from one edge of the world to the other without asking permission. She thought about what it meant to choose something, not because you had no alternative, but because it was the thing you would choose with every alternative available. Yes, she said. I choose it. Elias breathed. Just once, just slightly deeper than the ones before it. The breath of a man who has been hoping for something and has just received it. Good, he said. And in his voice was everything the 5 quiet years, and the account book, and the wagon ride, and the way he had stood in the hall of the courthouse, and exhaled when the gavel came down, and every cup of coffee, and every evening at the table, and every morning that the house had been a little less quiet than the one before. They were married on a Friday in November in the East Church, where Reverend Calhoun had finally said what he actually believed from the pulpit for the first time in 3 years, and had found that his congregation was not diminished by honesty, but enlarged by it. Alice Garner sat in the front row with her husband, who had come back into his own eyes in the months since the ruling, the eyes of a man who had had something restored that he had stopped hoping would be restored. Samuel stood beside Elias and wore his good coat and kept his face carefully neutral all the way through the ceremony, except for the moment at the end when Clara turned and looked at him with the specific look she reserved for him. Not mother, not sister, but the look of someone who had chosen him, and his face did the thing it did sometimes now, the thing that was not quite a smile, but was entirely happiness. The celebration after was held at the ranch in the yard that smelled like cold air and pine, and the particular clean smell of Montana winter coming in off the hills. People came who had not come to anything together in years. Jim Lacey brought bottles from the hotel. The Brennan family brought their fiddle player. Pryor and his son came and shook hands with ranchers they had not spoken to because Whitlock's careful management of grievances had kept them separate. Alice Garner found Clara near the fence line in the early evening when the party was loud enough that two people could talk without being overheard. "I wrote to the Caldwell family last week," Alice said. "Ruth is thinking about coming back to the valley." "Good," Clara said. "And the Briggs boy Tom's youngest, he's looking at the north parcel, the one that went to auction after the ruling." Alice paused. "He can't afford it yet, but he's looking." "Tell him to come talk to me," Clara said. "About the books. About how to structure the purchase." Alice looked at her. "You'd do that?" "Of course," Clara said. Alice was quiet for a moment. She looked at the yard, at the people, and the light, and the fiddle, starting up somewhere behind the barn. She looked at Clara. "Margaret would have—" She stopped, started again. "She would have been glad," she said, "that someone finished it, and that it was someone like you." Clara looked at the fence line, at the wildflowers that were gone now in November, dried and brown, but whose roots were still in the ground and would come back in spring, the way they always did, unplanted, untended, impossibly persistent. "I'm glad it was me too," she said. Later, when the party had wound down, and the neighbors had gone, and Samuel had fallen asleep in the chair by the fire, in the way of someone too young to admit they are tired and too stubborn to go to bed, Elias and Clara stood on the porch in the cold, clear night with the Montana stars doing their endless, unapologetic work overhead. "Next spring," Clara said, "I want to write to the families, all 11. Whether they can come back or not, I want them to know what Margaret built for them. I want them to know her name." "We'll write to them together," Elias said. She turned and looked at him. This man. This quiet, plain, careful man, who had handed a frightened girl a room with a lock and a choice, and had asked for nothing in return, except the right to be honest, and the right to build something slowly, and the right to call what grew between them by its true name when they were both ready. "I came here terrified," she said. "I know," he said. "I thought I was coming to survive," she said. "I didn't know I was coming to live." He looked at her. His hand found hers in the dark, simply without ceremony, the way he did everything because it needed doing, and he was there, and there was no reason to make it into something other than what it was. "You were always going to live," he said quietly. "You just needed somewhere that didn't get in the way of it." She turned back to the sky. The impossible, enormous, unapologetic sky that had terrified her the first time she stood under it, and that she had come over the months to understand as the most honest thing she had ever seen. It did not pretend to be smaller than it was. It did not arrange itself for anyone's comfort. It simply was what it was, completely and without apology, from one edge of the world to the other. She understood it now in a way she had not before, because she was what she was, finally, completely without apology. A woman who thought too much and kept meticulous records and burned letters on train platforms and found evidence in wooden boxes and learned to navigate fence lines in the dark and loved a quiet cowboy who gave her a room with a lock and asked her 3 months later if she still chose this. She had chosen it. She chose it still. She would choose it every morning. She woke up in this house, in this valley, under this sky for the rest of her life, and the choice would never feel like less than it did in the first moment she made it, because a choice made freely does not diminish with repetition. It deepens. It becomes something you are rather than something you did. The girl who had come west terrified had become a woman who stood in the dark with her hand in a quiet man's hand and looked at an impossible sky and felt for the first time in her life, and without qualification, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had not been rescued. She had not been saved. She had been given a room and a lock and a choice, and she had done the rest herself, and the doing had made her into someone she recognized and was glad to be. That was the only kind of home worth having. The kind you build with your own hands, in a place where someone finally had the sense to get out of your way and let you build it. Clara Whitmore. Rowan stood under the Montana stars and breathed in the cold, clean air of her own life, and she was